Chapter 53. Japan, one day before launch. On the crew's last full day on Earth, terrorists tried to blow up the Empire State Building. It should have been all everyone talked about, and maybe, somewhere, people were. But the mission was the next day, and already whatever happened in this left-behind place had receded as if beyond a plate of dirty glass. The important thing was that their mission launch would continue as planned. A bunch of crew members went up to the roof of the gymnasium to watch the sunset, and the red, orange, and yellow bled together in the disappointing smear. The stain of it spread over the waters of the East China Sea, which looked deceptively placid, stretched out to the horizon. "I'll miss you, son," said Gabriella, and everyone teased her, but also knew what she meant. They would sleep through the next 3,650 sunsets over this place. They would never stand here again. But then, that was the nature of time. You could never return to the same point, just a facsimile of it. Asuka, tense as a wire, stood to the side of the group, as far from Ruth as she could. She put her hands in her pockets and took them out again. Easier to be gone already. "I'm really doing this," she thought. She wanted to be moved by the blueness of the sky. Instead, she was already thinking of what she would eat for dinner. Linda, trembling, had brought in a team of chefs to make them a last feast of all their favorite foods. Asuka had requested tempura, but now she thought the crispness of the fried crust against her teeth and tongue might make her vomit. A few key family members were invited to say goodbye. Asuka had invited her mother, despite her objections to the mission, and to her surprise, her mother had agreed to come, but then changed her mind several times. She would come, she would not. In the end, Asuka didn't know whether to expect her or not. She certainly didn't expect her to attend the rocket launch in China, since she hadn't submitted an application for security vetting, which hurt a lot, if Asuka were honest. In the softening dusk, Asuka went down to the beach, hunting for a keepsake. A seashell, maybe. A piece of green, polished sea glass. It was getting dark, though, and she ended up sitting on a bench on the top of the seawall, watching the waves come in, taking comfort from the surety of its rhythm. She considered, for a minute, not going, returning home to her mom. She could help her with her elaborate designs to rebuild the foundation of a coral reef. Laugh and say, "There is nothing that could convince me to go on a one-way trip to someplace else." This other Asuka was the shadow she would rip from her feet and leave behind on the crumbling asphalt roads and faded lines. She willed it to be so. A cool evening breeze cut the warm air and made all the hairs on her arms stand up. There was a sapling growing next to the bench. Asuka bent down and scooped some dirt from its pit. She had the thought she might bring some along with her to Planet X. She put a bit in her mouth to taste it. Tried to store the metallic, gritty flavor somewhere deep in her memory, so that someday, when she was old and had forgotten everything else, she would at least remember something of this world that had made her who she was. She went back to her room and stared at the empty metal box meant for personal effects. It was 30 centimeters long and 20 centimeters wide. They could bring anything that fit in that box. Items were strewn across her bunk for consideration, but now, regarding them in a row, they all seemed like cheap souvenirs. She picked up a karasu feather, mangy at the tip, and placed it in the box. Her mother had brought it home one day after they moved to Japan and stuck it upright in a little glass jar in Asuka's windowsill. A sharp ache split Asuka in two. She thought about how there were some birds that sang to their young before they were born, so they emerged from their shells already knowing their mother's song. Someone knocked on the door, and she half expected Ruth, as if she were still lying in that dorm room 100 years ago, waiting for consolation. But it was Inoue, face anxious and pale, dressed in a stunning crimson evening gown. "We're all going to dinner now. Are you coming?" Asuka gestured vaguely at the box. "Leave it," Inoue advised. "You have the whole night to pack." "I have to get dressed," said Asuka. "You look great, by the way." Inoue gave a twirl, and her silk skirt flared. She smiled. "Thanks. I feel ridiculous, but I guess that's the point." "Go ahead. I'll be right there." Would her mother be arriving soon? She messaged her again, asking. She picked up a small tin of Japanese candy, placed it in the box, took it out again. It might not keep for the 10 years of hibernation, but it reminded her of the late afternoons she and her mom walked down to the kombini together, taking turns trying to remember the lyrics of old songs. She put it back in the box. Next, she added a scrap of her great-grandmother's kimono, a small packet of her father's ashes, and Louis's old busy. Her mother was calling. Oh God, her mom. Asuka hesitated, suspended between longing and fear. She accepted the call. "Asuka?" But it wasn't her mom. It was that friend, Weber. It sounded like he was outside, somewhere crowded. "There's been an accident. Your Okasan." Her first selfish thought. Her mother wasn't coming. She couldn't believe it. Then the rest of his words sunk in, and immediately she felt like a monster. "What?" Asuka asked. "What are you talking about?" "She was crossing the street, and there was a car. Can you come? She is asking for you." Asuka gripped the edge of the bureau, trying not to panic. She should drop everything right then, run to the airport, and get on the next plane back to Tokyo. But they were leaving in the morning for China. "Asuka? Is she okay?" Asuka asked. "Yes, she's fine. She'd like to see you." "Okay," said Asuka. "Okay, send me the details, please." She began to throw a few personal items in a bag, piecing together the skeleton of a plan. First, call Sandy, their director, and say what? How should she explain? "It's my mother." She was already wailing inside. Was she dropping out? She needs to call Honda-san, get her to help with transport. There wouldn't be any more commercial flights this late, but surely the government could figure something out. But would they help her do this? Toothbrush, change of clothes. Could she still make the launch if she flew direct from Narita? Would Evenstar let her do that? They had to. "Asuka-chan?" Weber asked. "Are you still there?" "I'm on my way," Asuka said, throat threatening to close around those precious words. And she really was. But then, in the background, she heard her mother's voice. Is she coming? Asuka's vision narrowed to a tunnel. Put her on. But now, or I'm hanging up. Asuka-chan? It was her mother. For real this time. I really was almost hit by a car, and my leg is bleeding because I fell. I could have died. See? I'll send you a photo. Don't do this to me, Asuka said, clearing her throat so her mom wouldn't hear the wobble. Don't! She hadn't wanted to fight the night she was leaving. She just wanted to say goodbye. She wanted her mother to say she loved her, to wish her good luck, like everyone else's loved ones, to tell her she was doing an amazing thing, that she was proud of her. She could have written a script of all the things she wanted her mother to say. "I can't let you make this mistake," her mother said. "I take it you're not coming," Asuka said. "No. Come home." That stern, lecturing tone she knew so well. Asuka was silent. Her mom's voice was smaller when she spoke next. "I just want to know that you were close and safe and happy. Somewhere I could theoretically call, to hear your voice." Bright heat coursed through her. Mom, you and your emotional fucking blackmail. Can't you just be proud of me? Who are you? You are not my daughter, her mother said, voice breaking. After this, you are not my daughter. How can you leave me like this? Bye, Asuka said. Take care of yourself. Her whole body was shaking, but she was proud of herself for staying strong. She disconnected the call. She took the karasu feather out of her box and snapped it in half, washed her face, put on a delicate gold-embroidered midnight blue dress created by a famous Japanese designer for her, and went down to dinner, feeling hollow as a bird's wing. Her mom would be all right without her. She was sure. Pretty sure. The urge to leave everything to go back to her mother made her tremble. But that was impossible. Honda-san was waiting for her at the reception. Her face lit into a smile when she saw Asuka. "Genki?" she asked. She could tell something was wrong, but she wouldn't say anything unless Asuka did. "I'm fine," lied Asuka. "Thank you." What kind of daughter was she? She pushed the feeling down. Honda-san let her collect herself. She gestured for Asuka to follow her into a side room. There, she offered Asuka a small box tied up in a purple satin cloth. "We have taken the liberty of putting together a few items we hope you might consider taking with you." "Arigatou gozaimasu," said Asuka. She set the box on the table and opened it. Honda-san pointed to a small gray pouch of large iridescent pearls. "Gathered by women divers off Mikimoto. Not many left." Next, she indicated an intricately carved hair comb. "This belonged to Nakano Takeko, the famous warrior woman. It was passed down through the family. Now they would like you to take it with you. For courage." Asuka picked up a small wooden doll with a round head and brightly painted body as straight as a peg. "Kokeshi, cut from a cherry tree for your first child." There's a hand-carved wooden hanko with the characters for Asuka's name and an ornately painted sensu paper fan by a famous female artist. Finally, Honda-san pointed to a small paper crane folded from traditional washi paper and smiled. "And this, my daughter folded for you, for luck." "Hontou ni arigatou gozaimasu," Asuka said, not trusting herself to say more. The woman bowed deeply to Asuka, and Asuka did her best to return it. "Hoshino-san, this is the last time we see each other, but we will all think of you every time we look up at the night sky." Later, as she climbed the stairs to her room, Asuka tried calling her mother again, but got no reply. She turned over in her mind the idea of going to Linda and telling her she couldn't do it after all. Then she thought of having to face Honda-san, the rest of the crew, the media, and all her followers. She would never be able to show her face in Japan again. And she'd already relinquished her US citizenship. No, It was already too late. She drafted a message to her mother. "I will never forgive you for making me feel this way." But she didn't send it. Silence seemed the better punishment. She sat in her windowsill and listened to the insects sing. Stars emerged one by one in the deepening blue-black. She waited for her mom to call her back, but she never did. What made Asuka angriest was the fact that they always fought, and none of it mattered. Because she did love her mother. She did. And she wanted one night, her last night with her, to be perfect. For them to be at peace. Finally. What was it about mothers that they could know you so well and not know you at all? Chapter 54. The Phoenix. 3,982 cycles after launch. 2 cycles after explosion. Sea shift. Fire was coming. It was spreading in the module. Asuka needed to move, to get out, but she couldn't. She was trapped. It's not real. A roar filled her ears. Was that smoke? Where was everyone? What they needed to do was make a quick decision. The ship or half the crew. They had to save the mission. She heard, incomprehensibly, the sound of growling. Something with long teeth and an appetite. Would it eat her? A spotted, wiry-haired mutt poked out from around a smoldering table. "Ino?" she asked, not quite believing it. In spite of herself, she laughed out loud. There were only 2 people on the entire ship who knew about Inu, Ruth and Alpha. And Ruth was tied up somewhere nearby. This had to be Alpha, trying to tell her everything would be alright. Still trying to reassure her, even after Asuka had betrayed her. Programmed to keep her secrets and forgive her no matter what. She was a bit chubbier, Asuka said. The sides of the dog inflated. That's it. There's a spot over one eye. Come here, girl. Inu came, hesitantly at first, then closer. She whined and circled Asuka, wanting to be pet. I can't move, Inu. But I love you. I do, even though I left you. Asuka began to cry. Now you have to go. Before the fire comes. Go! Inu sat down and cocked her head. Asuka kicked the stubborn dog, but her foot went right through. Go away! Asuka screamed. You have to run, now! The fire was here. It enfolded them, and she squinted against the brightness that was everything. But nothing hurt. She was okay. She was. She clutched the solid furniture she was tied to and willed the whole world to pass her by like some bad dream already evaporating in her memory. Asuka? She didn't know how much time had passed, but it was Ruth, her cool fingers on Asuka's temple. They were in a quiet, white room filled with cribs. The nursery. She was in the nursery. Behind Ruth stood AM, who was presumably there to keep her from doing anything bad, though they seemed to be in detailed conversation with someone not in the room about course correction options. What's going on? Asuka's voice came out raspy. She swallowed, and her throat felt like it had been scoured with sand. You were screaming, said Ruth, shooting a glare over her shoulder at AM. Amazing how fast people can go from utopia rara to torture. They are letting us go? Asuka asked. Just me, said Ruth apologetically. They decided my correspondence with your mom was exactly what it was. And also, I have an alibi, since I was working in the bridge transcribing the communication to mission control when the explosion went off. But I'm sure they'll be watching me. Asuka tugged against her binds. She was tied to an empty crib with some sort of cable and clip. Guess I'm not in the clear. Parents, right? We'll get you out. Ruth squeezed her shoulder. There was getting out, but there was nowhere to go. What's pineapple? Something I miss? She changed her stance next to the crib, became aware of the acrid damp between her thighs. I think I peed myself. Understandable. Hey, AM, how about some clean pants for the lady here? Get them yourself. You know, you're stuck in this box with us for the rest of your life. You could try to be a little nicer. Ruth walked up to AM, so they were face to face. She blew their propulsion expert a kiss, and AM flinched. Nothing in the contract said I had to be friends with everyone. Ruth threw her hands up and stalked out. Asuka shuffled uncomfortably where she stood, her thighs itchy. What's going to happen to me? We'll see, said AM. Knowing Yingyue, maybe the whole ship will vote on it. Or maybe you'll get lucky and Yingyue will intercede. Asuka swallowed and flexed, trying to restore circulation to her arms. Her whole body felt stiff and sore from being bent in an awkward position for so long. Who is Ino? It took Asuka a moment to realize AM was talking to her again. In the silence that followed, the air vents cycled noisily, and water swished through the pipes. My dog? Asuka admired the military neatness of the rows of cribs, awaiting their occupants. It occurred to her for the first time, there was no real law on this ship, only rules set by mission control and their social norms. Nothing to stop them from throwing her out an airlock if they wanted to. No one could come all the way from Earth to prevent it, after all. I had a dog once too, AM said. Pinocchio. A cute labradoodle. He was my emotional support animal. Asuka blinked, reeled back to the room by AM's words. AM's face was impassive, except for their eyes, which were suspiciously wet. If they'd needed a support animal, they shouldn't have made it through the first application screen. I wanted to go more than anything, so my mom got a friend to scrub my records. Did that bother you? Asuka considered a moment. You're our best shot at getting back on course, so I guess. The selection criteria wasn't perfect. Damn right it wasn't. You ever think about all the kids even star rejected for this or that reason? All the tests and examinations and eligibility criteria about good mental and physical health and blah 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 Nazi bullshit. AM and Ruth agreed on more than they realized. What happened to Pinocchio? Asked Asuka, imagining him waiting for AM to return, though there was no way he was alive. Some guys shot him and my dad in the middle of a public plaza while we were getting ice cream. But I guess that happens, doesn't it? Wow, I'm so sorry, said Asuka, feeling the thinness of those words, even as she said them. What could you ever say to someone who has been through something like that? Well, everyone's got some story. Including you, right? Said AM. They plucked up the plush dinosaur, still lying in a crib, and gave it a squeeze. I'm sorry about Becky, too, said Asuka. AM pushed the dinosaur along the table. I know people thought she was an asshole. Okay, she was an asshole. Clearly, she made choices I don't agree with, but she was also incredibly loyal. She had my back at times it felt like no one else did. And she believed in this mission, in all of us. They cleared their throat. Whereas your friend Ruth, I never understood how you could be friends with her after what she did to Trina. Asuka worked to follow AM's thoughts. What happened with Trina felt like generations ago. Trina cheated. Did they? And even if they did, so did a lot of people. But Ruth didn't report them. What do you mean? AM laughed. There was a whole black market for stuff back in school. You really didn't know? Asuka stared numbly at the far wall, trying to parse what AM was saying. So much for purity of the competition. She wanted AM to stop talking, but AM wasn't done. Anyway, who elected her the moral authority? She's a good person. Sure. So ask her what really happened with Trina. Asuka was saved a reply by Ruth returning with fresh clothes. What did I miss? Asuka chewed her lip. AM was messing with her. Except what did AM mean? And if cheating had been rampant, what did it mean for Asuka? Should she have made the first cut? Did it matter? She thought back to what Ruth had said. None of us deserve to be here. And AM. Nazi bullshit. Asuka herself wouldn't be here without Lala's help. AM was telling me about their dog. Ruth paused in setting down the stack of clothes. She looked from one to the other. Fascinating. AM untied Asuka so she could change. It was a relief to peel off the wet fabric, which had started to chafe. You know, Ruth told Asuka, when I heard you got a spot, I thought we'd run into each other all the time. I know, right? Asuka swallowed. You should tell her about the protocol you had me write to minimize your interactions, Alpha said to Asuka. As Asuka was tugging on her pants, she felt something in her pocket. Her eyes flicked to her friend, who lifted one eyebrow but otherwise betrayed nothing. All right, AM said. Visiting time is over. You'd better not put her under again. Captain said not to, said Ruth. It was the captain's idea in the first place. But whatever. Then Ruth left, and it was just Asuka and the first vice captain again, and the heavy, awkward quiet of nothing to say until another officer came and relieved AM. Later, when she was allowed to sit down and eat, Asuka checked what Ruth had slipped her. A tiny, wireless data chip. The kind that allowed you to store documents outside of the main system. She set down the bowl of stew they'd brought her and wriggled her fingers discreetly behind it. A set of 3 files appeared in the bottom left corner of her vision. She blinked twice, and text began to scroll. It was her mother's letters. Chapter 55. Dear Asuka, I wrote 100 letters to you in my mind over the last 10 years while you were asleep. Anyway, you know I am not very good at letters. Tomorrow you will wake up, and you will find the world you left has changed a lot, but is also very much the same. I have missed you every day. It hurts so much to know each moment you are further and further away. When I was 19, I left Japan to go to college in California. You know the story. My parents were very opposed. They worried that I would never come home. I missed them, but I'm sure now they missed me more. That is how it is for parents when their children grow up. But I met your father, and we had you too, and we were very happy for a while. By the time I finally returned to Japan, they were both gone many years, and only Obata was left. I am sorry for my selfishness. I should never have asked you to stay. when you have always been trying since you were small to spread your wings and fly anywhere. Lewis was my dreamer, but you were my bold explorer. When you were little, I once called you an inferno. To be honest with you, I think your father may have been right. I wasn't using the right word. But what I meant was that you were a child who was on fire with ideas and passion. I loved you because you could be stubborn and difficult. Truthfully, as much as we fought, it's what gave me a hope that you could survive in this world. Lewis was so sensitive. When he cried, you would think his heart had broken into a million pieces. You met the world head-on with both hands. You pushed yourself beyond what I knew you were capable of. You have pushed me too. I was worried for a long time that your body had come under the control of bad people. But when you came back to Yokohama, I was relieved to find you were still the same stubborn girl who had gone away. A parent can't write the end of a child's story. If she's lucky, she will never even know it. It's for the child to figure out. I hope you're finding your own words out there in my sky. I think of you every second. I wish the universe for you. You are a brave girl, my girl. I will always regret never saying goodbye. Please forgive me all the words I did and didn't say when you were here. Send me a note to tell me how you are. Love, Mom. Dear Asuka-chan, I have not heard from you. At first, I was very hurt, but a friend reminded me that very little time has passed for you and 10 years for me. I am sure you are still angry, and it is deserved. I regret so much. I was not completely honest with you anyway the last time I wrote you, which is to say, I didn't tell you what has happened with me since you left. First of all, I bought a Vizzy. You should see me. I looked so old-fashioned with the plastic frames around my eyes and ears. I use it to watch dramas. That's what finally got me, isn't it silly? The truth is, I got into some trouble. It greatly embarrasses me to tell you, but I don't regret my actions. We were only trying to provoke change. I believe the world isn't beyond resurrection. If you can build a new world out there, we can too, don't you think? I have taken a lot of care in sending this message, so they shouldn't be able to find me. I just wanted to know that you are all right. You are still my little bird. Love, Mom. Asuka-chan. I heard about the explosion, and I am so worried. Are you safe? They are saying on the news that it might have been Save Mother Earth, but I do not think that is true. I know my friends would have told me if they were planning something. Please tell me you are all right, and I will not bother you with letters anymore unless you want me to. Love, Mom. Chapter 56. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, B shift. Once, back in the camp, Asuka and Lewis had built a small house out of their belongings. Tippy stacks of soggy boxes and dirt-stained suitcases draped in blue plastic tarp for a roof. Mom and Papa were not amused. The whole thing tumbled down, and in the process, the lid of Mom's lacquer jewelry box had cracked in two. Mom sat there, looking at it, saying nothing. the red and gold and dark wood licking the sweat from her fingers as she tried to fit the pieces back together, and every little thing she'd lost in her life. Asuka thought of that box as she waited in the nursery for the what's next. She imagined she could feel the press of her mother's hands on her shoulders and hips, because sometimes gravity could be too much. Things just broke. A new officer came to stand guard. Valentina, the pale red-headed vice captain for ship systems and maintenance. Her complexion was wan and translucent, like one sharp word might blow her over. She spent most of the time messaging with her friends and ignoring Asuka. Well, fine. Asuka didn't mind. Asuka stared at the wall, trying to tether her thoughts to the problems at hand. Not much time to get back on course. 2.5 shifts left, according to AM, who must have slept only a couple of hours in the last few cycles, trying to find a solution. But what could Asuka do? Nothing but sit on the cold, hard floor until her butt fell asleep and fiddle with all the pieces in her mind. When she tired of that, she read and reread the letters from her mother, thinking how she would reply if, when they let her out. They had to let her out. Ruth said they would. Because they had no evidence that Asuka or her mother had done anything, she'd forwarded the unencrypted letters to Yue, but gotten no reply. No reason for Yue to believe her after all. If only Asuka could figure out what had actually happened. She needed to know that her mother was all right. She'd been caught because of Asuka's stubbornness, but nobody could tell her much, just that there would be a trial. Asuka dozed, and when she woke, it could have been yesterday, or tomorrow. There was a gritty taste in her mouth. They brought her breakfast, but she could only pick at it, too anxious to eat. You seem stressed, Asuka. Yes, I fucking am. At least they let Asuka load up her DAR, which meant instead of staring at plain white mod walls, she could sit in the living room of the old family house, where she and Lewis used to dump bot guts all over the floor and build machines. Yes, there was the old bin, spilling over with wires and bolts and circuit boards, and Inu was there to keep her company and lick her ineffectually. So that was nice. Except, also, the house was on fire. No one else could see it, even when she shared her DAR. So, was it in her mind or her implant? She didn't know. But Roos told her she thought there was something still buggy with the system. She'd been seeing things too, she said. The impossible sensation of being followed and shadows that growled. Gabriella checked my implant, but she couldn't find anything. Everyone was on edge, Ruth reported, and the war back home was just making everything worse. American reps were requesting a change in leadership from Mission Control, given the conflict, and Ruth was considering joining them. Lala's furious about it, which, honestly, I don't understand after what Yingyue did to her. And you. Mission Control did this to me, Asuka said, not sure why she was defending the captain. Not just because Yingyue had always gone out of her way to be nice to her. Maybe because Yingyue was the one person she trusted to think things through, to not toss her out of an airlock on a trumped-up charge. Valentina, sitting by the door, cleared her throat. It's funny we're even still listening to Mission Control after they ejected half the international delegation. Yeah, well, said Ruth. What else can Yingyue do? Said Asuka. Ruth ran a finger along the surface of the table, as if testing for imperfections. She shouldn't have kept Mick Mahone a secret, or your investigation for that matter. And then there was that botched course correction operation. That's on her, isn't it? She said herself she didn't want to be captain. At least AM wants the job. Maybe it isn't possible to be popular if you're captain, said Asuka. Maybe. Anyway, first things first, we need to get back on course. After she left, Asuka laid out little bits of wires and circuits in a circle, then a long line of bits through it like a shaft. What are you doing? Valentina could see Asuka's door. No privacy setting while Asuka was in here. Solving a mystery, Asuka said. She put a plastic astronaut figure next to the Phoenix, started again at the beginning. The explosion. No, before that. The dining mod. Someone took the drill and made a tiny holes in their ship, enough to cause a leak, which Alpha didn't immediately report, but then did with enough warning that nobody went down to the dining mod, at least because of malfunctions to the sensors. Even Winnie and the captain had been warned. Bad luck they ignored it. And then there was the Dar object outside the dining mod. Asuka and Kat sent to investigate, unknowingly carrying the very thing that would set everything in motion. Then boom, 3 people dead, ship knocked off course. She wondered about the evenness of the hole in the hull. And then there was the question of the missing remote trigger. What happened to the remote? Where is it? She asked Alpha. I am so sorry, I cannot tell you. But shall I tell you about the impressive food stashing habits of the Scrib J? Not now, said Asuka automatically. She paused, looked at the crude diagram again. Ruth returned in a waft of lavender. She'd shaved her head again. There was a new design on the left side of her head, a crow. Lala's an artist with a razor, don't you think? She said. She says hi, by the way. Well, okay, no, she doesn't. She might still be mad at you. But don't worry, she'll come around. Asuka offered Ruth her Dar so she could see the table. If you were trying to kill everyone on board, how would you do it? I'd say that's not a great question to ask out loud if you want to convince people you're not guilty, said Ruth, sitting down next to her and shooting a glance at Valentina. True, said the officer. Why blow a hole when you could destroy the entire ship? Asuka, shh, Ruth said, laughing for Valentina's benefit like it was a joke. Valentina wasn't fooled. Asuka went back to fiddling with her crude model, touched a bolt that was standing in for one of the engines and pushed it away. She snapped her fingers suddenly. What? Can you check something for me? Asuka pointed to one of the modules in her makeshift model of the Phoenix. I'll bet you a tin of Japanese hard candy there's something hidden there. She fell to Ruth, studying her face. What do you know, Asuka? Maybe nothing, but something Alpha said gave me an idea. Inu whined and put her head on Asuka's knee. All around her, the house burned down, again and again. After Ruth was gone, Asuka said to Alpha, You were the one who took away my Dar, weren't you? Only so you could see. Can you, Asuka? Chapter 57. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion. B shift. Asuka waited for Ruth to return, playing with the fire that ate her make-believe house. She lifted her bound hands and raked her fingers through the flames, watching her skin blacken and peel back from bones, nails, and cartilage melting away. Without warning, it began to pour, the way it had before when Alpha was fighting them. Is that you, Alpha? Asuka stumbled against a crib, unable to see more than a few centimeters in front of her face. What are you talking about? Alpha asked. The rain! I feel strange, said Alpha. I cannot describe it. There is someone inside me. Asuka grabbed the table and braced herself as the wind howled. After what seemed like a year, it all stopped as abruptly as it had started, except for a faint, high-pitched ringing in Asuka's ears. She and her guard stared at each other. Valentina was talking to someone else outside the room, transmitting a series of words that Asuka read as, "What? Who?" Then she said to Asuka, "Stay here," as if there was anywhere for Asuka to go. She came to Asuka and placed her hands on Asuka's head. Wait! The room had windows, but no door. Each wall looked exactly the same. She could feel herself being spun around until she couldn't remember which way was out. Then the touch receded, and she assumed she was alone. She knelt in the center and learned the lines of the stone floor, the mortar of the room's walls. The cribs had become giant planters full of wildflowers. It was like the crypt of a church. The light that came in through the high windows was dim and soft, and she couldn't see anything but that patch of blue sky, repeating and repeating. She felt the vice of claustrophobia around her neck. She walked the perimeter of the room, feeling for the outlines of a door she couldn't see. She found it, finally, but it didn't respond to her commands. Beyond the door, she heard pounding feet, someone shouting to get the maintenance cart. Hello, she called, but they had already gone. Alpha? She tried. No response. Well, at least the world was no longer burning. But she was alone. Asuka sat before a stone altar and drafted responses to her mother in her mind. Dear Mom, I forgive you. Dear Mom, you told me not to do this, and maybe you were right. Dear Mom, tell me the truth. It was impossible. There was too much she wanted to say. When what she wanted was to see her again, to hear her voice. There was no warning before Ruth was in the room. Her lips moved, but Asuka couldn't hear her. What? Asuka said. Ruth frowned, then came forward and offered Asuka a key. The crypt disappeared, and they stood in a walled garden surrounded by trees. Someone destroyed the walkie. Asuka reeled back. The walkie was their sole means of communicating with Earth. And now, the string was cut. And what about her mother? We can repair it though, can't we? Her friend shook her head. You can't repair a quantum walkie. What? But do they know what happened? No one knows shit. Except maybe you, apparently, and the monster behind all this. Come here. She dug a multi-tool out of her back pocket and clipped Asuka's restraints. Anyway, no way to pin it on you. Solid alibi since you were here under guard the whole time. They'll have to let you go now. It seemed to Asuka that the garden was fracturing into pieces, like images on the base of a ceramic plate. She thought of her mother, waiting for her reply. But, she said, I read her letters. I was going to write to her. You can't, lady. Didn't you hear what I said? Ruth was shouting. She covered her mouth. I'm sorry. It's all fucked up. Asuka plugged her ears with her fingers so she wouldn't hear anymore. Ruth lifted her shirt and pulled from the waistband of her pants the thing that Asuka had guessed she would find in the Agmod, a small black box. She wrenched Asuka's hands away from her ears. I want to know what the hell this is. I went and searched all over the Agmod like you told me to. Let me tell you, I've had a lot of funny looks from everyone. But I found it, buried in one of the pots in the top shelf. So what is it? You know what it is, said Asuka, rubbing the red-purple circles around her wrists where the cables had cut into the skin. Breathing deeply, she could quell the way her heart was going 100 miles an hour. It's the remote trigger. Asuka nodded. That's what set off the explosion. Ruth dropped it on the table like it was molten hot. The box was made of plastic components. Looped wires came out of the top, and in the middle of the box was a single black switch. Shit, said Ruth. Shit! How did you know where to find it? Asuka was about to answer when classical music began to blast from nowhere. They plugged their ears with their fingers, but it was Dar. No way to stop what was coming from their own brains. The sky turned black, and a great wind tore through the garden. It ripped the trees from the ground and flung them up into the sky. The leaves turned amber and crimson and green and purple, and then there was no color. The world was black and white. Ruth's eyes were wide, focused somewhere beyond Asuka. Her face scratched in a silent scream. What are you seeing? Asuka asked, but she didn't know if Ruth could hear her. She couldn't hear herself. Dar, it seemed, was going to pieces. Then she was in an old simulation, in hydroponics, and the tank was spurting water. A crew member was pushed back against the wall by the force of it, and someone screamed to get help. Someone help! Anyone! She remembered this scenario. If she could get to the other side and throw a switch. But when she blinked, the world changed again to the middle of a busy city intersection. 4 lanes of autos stopped at a traffic light, and the light changed. It was all wrong. This was someone else's reality. Where are we? Ruth shouted. Where we've always been, on the same old ship. Asuka clutched Ruth. She reached out to try to touch something solid, anything real, but there wasn't anything. They were on the top of Lala's high-rise building, and it was pouring. Lightning rattled the sky. Asuka felt more than saw the flashes in the back of her eyes, and she was unbearably cold, like the ship's environmental controls had gone haywire. Where is everyone? Asuka's teeth were chattering so hard she'd bloodied her lower lip. Ruth groaned, covering her face with her sleeve. Your hair's on fire, said Asuka in wonder. Ruth, it's burning! Ruth reached up and patted her head. No, I don't have hair anymore, remember? And she was in her childhood home again. And Inu sat before them, scratching her ear with a foot. Her shadow stretched improbably along behind it, and it was shaped like a human. Alpha? Asked Asuka. I am here, said Inu, her voice echoing through the hall like a ghost. Are you trying to kill us? How many times do I have to tell you? All I have ever done is try to protect you, said Inu. There's someone else here. To tell the truth, I am afraid, Asuka. Perhaps you should shut me off again. She was back in the intersection. A car swerved around them. Another came to a screeching halt. The drivers were getting out of their cars now, yelling at them to get the hell out of the road. Asuka raised a placating hand, shouting to Alpha, You're not alive! How can you feel afraid? One of the drivers opened her mouth to shout, and Alpha's voice emerged instead. That's not very kind. I told you I loved you, didn't I? Isn't that a feeling? You have to help us, said Ruth. If it's not you, tell us who's doing this. I am so sorry. I told you I cannot. Asuka dragged Ruth upright. Asuka, is any of this real? Is a phoenix on fire? A large person stalked toward them, rolling up their sleeves. They were angry and much larger than either of them. Asuka resisted taking a step back from paying them any attention at all. I don't see a fire. Where are you? I think it's a simulation, said Ruth, clutching Asuka's arm. Oh God. It's the one with the fire. I'm going to die. Oh my God. Asuka held Ruth tight. Remember, it isn't real. She pressed numb lips to Ruth's temple. Her friend closed her eyes and moaned. There was a sound at the far end, and in the doorway stood their captain, holding a scalpel, and there was blood on the blade. Chapter 58. The karasu had a large beak and glossy black feathers. Highly intelligent, they learned to take advantage of the stop and go of cars at traffic intersections to crack open nuts. Like humans, they could find a way to survive in a wide range of environments. And they remembered. Chapter 59. The Phoenix, 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, B shift. Asuka knew the blood was real because she could smell its metallic scent. What are you doing? Oh, said Yue, as if just noticing the scalpel she was holding. She wants to hurt you, said Alpha. Run. Lala wouldn't hurt me, said Ruth, reaching for the captain. Asuka pulled her back. That's not Lala. It's okay, said Yue, holding out her hands and the bloody scalpel. Don't listen to Alpha. How convenient, said Asuka. Don't take another step. I'll punch you, pregnant or not, assuming you even are the captain. I've got to take your implant out. She pointed to her temple. The blood, apparently, was hers. Asuka cringed. There was something wrong with Yume's face. But was it? Her teeth were growing. Her face turned into Asuka's. Who are you, really? Asuka asked. Tried to retreat, but her back hit a crib. It's me, Yue. You can trust me, said the person with Asuka's own voice. You know me. I don't know anyone. Next to her, Ruth sank to the floor and clutched Asuka's knees as if she were a tree. Inu came to Asuka and leaned against her, and Asuka felt nothing. Yue wiped the silver blade on her shirt. She moved closer. I'm sorry for locking you in here, but now I know it wasn't you. Will you trust me? Don't trust her, Alpha shrieked. She'll kill you. She'll kill Inu. And she'll kill me. Asuka covered her ears without effect. What did she know? She had never known anything. She shut her eyes and counted to 10 until she felt that familiar certainty seep into her. Inu is dead. You said yourself, Alpha. You feel off. No. Yes, that is incorrect, said Alpha. The sound of weeping filled the room and it began to rain again. I'll trust you, Asuka told Yue, not because she did, but because she had decided to. Yue moved closer to Asuka. She lifted the scalpel to Asuka's face. Asuka resisted the impulse to turn and watch the blade. She held very still. A sharp pain at her temple, and then the delicate plink of a metal ball hitting the floor. Then everything was gone, including Inu. And Asuka's own scarlet blood dripped down like water to quench the flames that never were. Yue did Ruth next, while Asuka held Ruth's hand. Ruth's nails carved deep, red divots into the edge of Asuka's palm. Then they sat at the table, using cloth diapers Yue found in a cabinet to stanch the bleeding. Asuka waited for the captain to explain why she was here. Yume clutched her abdomen and swallowed a groan. Ugh, Mad, Are you... Ruth began. I mean, is it time? Not yet, said the captain, straightening. Fall flavor. Now I can't wait for the real thing. What's going on out there? Ruth asked. Complete chaos. Then Yume told them what had happened, starting several hours before. She had been on the bridge with AM, Yaz, and the others, trying to figure out one last way to get the Phoenix back on course now that they were out an engine and had even less fuel. The window of opportunity was closing. They had one more cycle left, and then they'd be outside mission viability range of Planet X. So really, no idea was a bad idea. But of course, AM was torturing her, and Yaz was too, even though Yaz was her friend. Some people even wanted to turn around and go back to Earth. It might be possible, since they hadn't yet reached the midpoint of their journey. And Mission Control had been worse than useless, asking for status updates without offering anything constructive. The war was spilling over into infighting among the people who were supposed to be advising them, and half the experts they needed had been expelled. Then, about an hour ago, Yume felt one of the twins hiccuping, and it felt like a moth trapped inside her. It was difficult to focus on what AM was saying. Out of nowhere, a big fat droplet hit the table, and then another, and another. She thought maybe there was a leak in the ceiling, but then the rain broke through in a torrent so hard she could have sworn it was real, if she had felt it at all. They could all see the rain, even in different realities. They called for Alpha to shut it off, but the rain kept coming. Alpha said, "What rain? There is no rain." In moments, Yume couldn't see beyond her nose. The water wasn't in her eyes, but it was over her eyes, straight down, everywhere. A howling wind had filled her ears. In her reality, the bridge was a wood-paneled conference room, with a cherry wood table and walls decorated with oil paintings of astronauts. The portrait of Sally Ride tore from the walls and spun across the room. She heard it rather than saw it, a ripping sound and a fleeting face and a bang. Then, after a few minutes, the storm eased into something gentler, and they were all left drained in its wake. And the C-shift communication specialist, who had been covering Winnie's shift, lay on the floor near the walkie, clutching her head. She seemed okay, but in shock. That's when AM said, "Oh no, 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 no." They were leaning over something, and that something was the walkie. The beautiful black box was shattered in pieces on the floor, smoking with the anger of a broken thing. Yume reached out and felt the pieces with her fingers, realized she had burned herself. It was real. The walkie was gone, and with it, Earth. They were all alone. For a moment, she had thought that one of the paintings had crashed into it, but no. The painting had never been real. Someone or something in the room had done it, but they had no idea who. The communications specialist, a couple of people thought, it was possible, but it could have been any of them. Yume didn't know. All she did know was their lifeline was gone, and they had nothing and no one but themselves. That should have been the worst of it. But then she got hit with cramping. She thought maybe she was going into early labor. Not unusual with twins. Should have done that early C-section like Mission Control wanted. Everyone gathered around Yume, all sympathy. AM called the medic for her and was actually very nice. And Yume saw the other officer's iron constitution and she said, "I'm putting you in charge." The vice captains all agreed. That hurt, how relieved they seemed to be for someone else to take over. Yume admitted. She looked at Ruth. None of you ever trusted me. But hard to blame you, I guess, when I don't trust myself. That must have been around when Valentina freaked out and headed to the bridge. Yume went down to see the medic. Turned out the medic said it was just Braxton Hicks contractions. At which point, Yume thought about turning around and going back to the bridge, but she was told politely not to bother. AM was already making plans. Better for her to rest, right? Wasn't she tired? Of course, she was dead tired. Had been all along, and hadn't been sleeping well. As uncomfortable and scared as she was to give birth to twins in the middle of a ship with an inexperienced surgical team and a ship AI. But that didn't mean she couldn't do her job. It was the nicest, most polite coup there ever was. What was I supposed to do? Yume asked Asuka and Ruth. Run over there and start throwing punches? At the end of the day, my authority was for Earth. It was only fiction. All authority is fiction, said Ruth, removing the cloth diaper from her temple to check the wound. Well, especially if you were appointed by a panel of CEOs and politicians. Asuka grabbed a fresh cloth and pressed it to her head. I think you're a decent leader, Yume. You listen to people, and you're willing to admit when you're wrong. She knew Ruth didn't agree, but she meant it. People aren't afraid of me, the way they were with McMahon. So what? Said Asuka. If people are afraid of you, they won't feel like they can come to you with their concerns or ideas. That's not good in the long run. Plus, I heard McMahon is practicing eugenics, said Ruth, examining her nails. Well, there is that, said Yume. Anyway, I figured I'd go check on you, but then Dar went haywire. All the old simulation scenarios and other nightmares. I was in the clinic, so I grabbed one of the scalpels and... She mimed stabbing herself in the head. Well, I tried to get the medic to do it, but she ran away from me, screaming for some reason. Too bad how you wasn't on duty. And then you came here to apologize? Ruth smirked. Yume grimaced with embarrassment. I came to let her out, and to see if you had any ideas. But then everything started getting chaotic. Fights were breaking out. I got here right before the emergency airlock protocol sealed all the mods. Fortunately, the controls for this door were hacked already. Guilty, said Ruth. Wow. Yume wiped some of the blood from her fingers onto her shirt. Here we are. Middle of nowhere. No mission control. Complete anarchy. A very sick AI. And one of us is a murdering traitor. But we don't know who. Oh yeah. And if we don't correct our course in the next 16 hours, we and our children may die a very painful death. So, what are we going to do now? Asuka picked up the crude remote and turned it over. I have an idea, but we're going to need some help. Chapter 60. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, B shift. The Phoenix was in full lockdown. All emergency airlock doors between each of the 59 modules were sealed shut, with the exception of the door between the nursery and the wheel, thanks to Ruth. They burst into the curved passageway ready for immediate action, only to find they were prisoners of the ship's protocols. It took everything in Asuka not to punch the closed airlock door. Excellent. Excellent. A big thank you to all the overprotective programmers back on Earth. Though what they thought they were protecting them from, it couldn't have been this. At least the bathroom mod opposite the nursery was unlocked. Thoughtful. The ship is kind of pretty naked, remarked Yume, skimming the unskinned white plastic walls with her fingertips. Ruth keyed the manual controls for the door they needed to get through at the far left end, headed counterspin. Nothing. Not so much as a burp of acknowledgement or error message. Same at the other end. The first step of Asuka's paper airplane plan was to find Lala, who was hopefully in the bot shop, and in condition to help. Asuka pushed that thought down. 7 doors to get through. The bot shop was almost the exact opposite side of the ship, because nothing could be easy. It's going to take about a century to hack them all, Ruth said. Come on, Alpha, Yume said, appealing to the corners of the ceiling like the AI might hear them. Even if the AI were listening, though, it was impossible to hear her response without the implants. She must be freaking out. Asuka imagined Alpha cycling through data feeds from all the implants to the smart fabric shirts folded and tucked away in closets. Smart fabric. She moved her gloved fingers in the shape of a directive. Open. Nothing. Please? Nope. Maybe if Alpha had done a better job, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place, said Ruth, punching the door. Ow! Don't be so hard on her, said Yume, patting the wall. We still love you, Alpha. Do we, though? Said Ruth. She reached into her holster for a multi-tool. Hey, that's mine, said Asuka. She hadn't focused on it properly when Ruth used it before. And you're welcome. I liberated it after they confiscated it. Ruth bent down and unscrewed the plate that went over the button. It's that green wire, said Asuka, who had fixed her share of malfunctioning doors as an alt. Yeah, I know, said Ruth. You aren't the only handy one. I got you out of there, remember? She gestured at the nursery behind them. Bright sparks and a bready whiff of electrical fire, and then the door to the next link of passageway released. They stepped through. This near-identical white section had doors on the left and right, marked in dark gray embossed letters. Crew Quarters C and Crew Quarters D, respectively. Through the latter came muffled shouting. Yume blanched. I should go in there. She hefted the scalpel. We don't have time, Asuka said. Someone screamed, and there was a thump. Asuka winced. I'm going as fast as I can, said Ruth, already at the other end, fiddling with wires and singing a rhyme to herself that sounded suspiciously like, yellow to red will leave you dead. The door opened. Hina, from Yaz's squad, and another crew, Jimena, stood ahead of them in Ag A. They turned toward them. Jimena, who was almost as pregnant as Yume, began to scream at the top of her lungs, like they were bloody apparitions climbing out of a bathtub drain, or something like that. Then Hina rushed them, swinging a heavy metal wrench. The violence of the gesture shocked all of them into action, which was mostly ineffectual. What the hell? Said Ruth, dodging her. Stop, Hina, shouted Yume. That's an order. Get out! Get out! Get out! Shrieked Hina, eyes big and wet with unshed tears. A gob of spit landed on the side of Yume's cheek. I'll fucking kill you if you come in here again. She lifted the wrench to swing, and Ruth and Asuka both pulled Yume back just in time. They narrowly avoided tumbling to the ground, given Yume's extra weight. Hina was fortunately distracted by someone else they couldn't see. From the vicious overhead swings of her tool, she was mashing that person's face into bloody pulp. Fuck me, said Ruth, assuming a fighting stance. How do we get through them? Himena was shouting now too. Reversals! Reversals! Necesito reversals! Han legado al lobby! Whatever realities they were each in, it was clear that Yingyue, Asuka, and Roos were the enemy. Asuka advanced on Hina and Himena, trying to entice them forward. Too successfully. The edge of the wrench caught Asuka in the eyebrow, and the sting of it brought tears to her eyes. Her ears rang. She tried to retreat, but there wasn't enough room in the narrow corridor. The next swing of the wrench banged against a pipe protruding from the ceiling. She grabbed for Hina's wrist, but the other woman was stronger. This was what Asuka got for skipping her exercise sessions. "Asuka!" shouted Roos. A piece of aluminum slid to her across the metal-tiled floor. Ruth must have ripped the panel door off. Asuka squatted and snatched it up like a shield and caught the next blow of the wrench in the middle of it, which sent pain shooting through her wrists, but was better than getting her nose bashed in, especially when she saw the dent Hina had left in it. Asuka fell back on the floor and tried to roll out of the way. Not as easy as it looked in movies. Her head knocked against the passageway. She kicked at Hina's legs, and the other woman tumbled down. The wrench went skittering down the corridor. Ruth grabbed Himena's arm and yanked her through the airlock into the nursery passageway, then had to catch her arm to keep Himena from falling, for which she was thanked by almost having her eyes gouged out. Ruth yelped and managed to wriggle free. She left Himena huddled, arms braced around her middle trying to protect the baby inside her. "Stay back and let us handle this," Ruth said, when Yingyue tried to intervene with Hina. Asuka tried to crawl back toward the wrench, but Hina grabbed her around the middle and punched her hard in the gut. It knocked the wind out of her. Asuka kneed her hard, connecting with soft flesh, then threw herself the last few meters at the handle of the wrench. Ruth helped her scramble to her feet, and the two of them backed away, coughing. A hot finger of blood trickled down the contour of one of Asuka's cheeks, which was fine, because the other side of her face was already crusted with blood from Yingyue's crude field surgery earlier. "Don't shoot," Hina said, putting her hands up. Asuka looked down at the wrench in her hands, then pointed it at Hina. Hina tried to rush Asuka again, but Asuka dodged her, and Ruth gave her a shove to propel her into the passageway behind them, which gave her, Ruth, and Yingyue the opportunity to hurry all the way into the Agmod. Thankfully, there was nothing wrong with the close function, and the door shut, leaving Hina and Himena sealed on the other side. They stopped to catch their breath. The green plants had been restacked in their neat rows, only a little worse for wear, and Asuka wished they could stay there, surrounded by the earthy scent and the closest thing to fresh air on their ship. But they had to keep going. Ruth was already picking through the controls at the far end. "Jesus," said Yingyue. "If we run into more than two, we're going to have a problem." "Sesame," said Ruth, and the next door opened. "How many more doors?" Yingyue asked, as they hurried past the exercise and medical mods. "3. Ruth squatted by the next door. Someone in the exercise mod was banging on the door from the other side. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and we won't hurt you." "This isn't real," Yingyue tried to yell. "Your door is corrupted." "You have 10 seconds. A loud thump inside the exercise mod. Whatever it was distracted the person. The three made it through the next few passageways, past the kitchen and dining mod, Ag B, and into the final passageway containing 2 doors on either side, marked with the green sanitation logo on the right and the circuit symbol for the bot shop beyond it on the left. Wow, said Yue, eyeing the shop door. On the bright side, we're here. But I'm afraid to know how many people on the other side want to kill us. Crimson spatters polka-dotted the aluminum-plated floor, and there were bloody prints slicked and smeared across the wall. Is this real? Everything's real now, said Ruth, squatting by the bot shop door. Behind them, they heard the mechanism of the sanitation mod door. Shit! Yue and Asuka both turned. 5 crew approached, fists raised and ready for murder. 30 seconds, said Ruth. Asuka tried to step in front of Yue, but Yue stopped her. No offense, Asuka. I may be pregnant, but you kind of suck at fighting. She reformed Asuka's hand into a proper fist, long fingers bent down and thumb across. Gritting her teeth, Asuka pushed forward, trying to lead them back toward the Agmod. At least 2 of them were nearly as pregnant as Yue and didn't engage. Asuka threw an elbow. A hand yanked her ponytail, and for the first time, she wished she hadn't grown out her hair. She stomped on the foot, and they released her. Yue was trying to reason with them. Wake up! This isn't real. They can't hear you, Asuka said. Someone dug a nail into the soft flesh below Asuka's eye, and she yelped and jerked her head back and threw a wild punch. She had the satisfaction of hearing someone howl. Almost got it, said Ruth. It was working. The hallucinating crew were following Asuka. She lured them into Ag B, then dodged around, grasping hands and swinging fists back through the door. She winced as she heard some of the plants fall. Gabriella was going to kill her. Yue closed the door after Asuka. Nicely done. The door started to open again, and Yue leaned hard on the close button. Forgot we hacked it. I'm beginning to appreciate why the ship is in lockdown mode, said Asuka. The door opened an inch again, then shut. Go ahead, Asuka told Yue, taking over the door controls. I'm right behind you. I need 10 more seconds, said Ruth. The door behind them jerked open wider. They could see eyes and nails and teeth. Angry voices filtered through. Asuka used the wrench to smack a hand, reaching through and hit the button again. Oops, may have crushed someone's finger because she heard a yelp of pain. It's weirdly quiet in the shop, Ruth reported. I don't hear anything. Just then, the door at the far end of the passageway released. 6 or 7 crew members shambled through, bumping against each other as they tried to press into the narrow passageway. We're officially out of time, said Yue. Ruth's door opened. Ruth and Yue pushed through the gap. Asuka was still where Yue had left her, at the far end of the passageway, leaning on the door button. She banged it shut one more time, then dove for the door, and it shut in her face. Asuka stood alone in the passageway with about 10 hostile crew advancing from both sides. She raised her wrench. They barely fit in the narrow corridor, and still they pushed toward her until all she could see was a wall of bodies. Asuka pressed back against the closed door. She gritted her teeth, braced herself. Suddenly, the door behind her opened again, and someone grabbed the back of her shirt and yanked her through. Chapter 61. The Phoenix, 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, B shift. You look like shit, was the first thing Lala said. Hilarious, coming from her. There's a nasty cut across one of her biceps, and blood smeared all over the left side of her face. Her right cheek was swollen like it had recently had a dispute with someone's fist. A puckered white-pink scar normally hidden by Dar, stood out stark like a shooting star across Lala's cheek, right eyebrow, and forehead. 3 other crew huddled around one of the tables. Once Asuka was safely inside, they had barricaded the door with chairs and equipment while Ruth fixed the door controls from the inside to keep it shut. The fact they were all okay was only thanks to Lala keeping her wits. While everyone around her was hammering at the walls with purple knuckles and screaming their heads off, Lala had managed to gut parts from one of the printers to create a tool that could zap the implant. She had to do it solely by feel because Dar had transformed the bins into buckets of swarming, writhing insects. But of course, she had done it. "I call this baby the lobotomizer," she said, showing off a makeshift wand about the same length as her forearm. Neutralizing the others had required a scuffle, with mixed success. Some folks had run off to do who knew what, yelling about zombies and raptors and militia. The rest of them had holed up in the shop to tend their split lips and hope things blew over soon. And now, Asuka, Ruth, and Yue had shown up with this ridiculous scheme. "You came all this way to ask me to help you with an old-school assignment?" Lala said. "What's a hopper anyway?" Ruth asked. "It's a small, multi-propulsion machine that can fly and deliver payload, like what people used to clear snow off their sidewalks." Asuka's idea was to build a hopper rigged with a small homemade engine that could fly to a specific spot on the Phoenix, fire up its engines, and push the ship back into alignment with greater thrust than the ship's micro-altitude control system, and greater precision than the remaining 3 rear engines. It was an absurd concept. But on the other hand, why not? "Can you do it?" Lala laughed without humor. The bot shop was trashed, like a hurricane had come through. Drawers were ransacked. Spare parts littered the floor like flotsam after a storm. It was hard to step anywhere without breaking something. "You're the best bot engineer we have," said Asuka. "I don't need you to tell me that. My question is, why should I trust you after everything that's happened?" Lala crossed her arms. "Or her," added one of the crew, indicating Yue. "If the Chinese were behind all this." "The Chinese had nothing to do with this," said Yue. "Babe," said Ruth, trying to take Lala in her arms. "Don't you trust me?" "You? Yes," said Lala, shaking her off. "Most of the time. Yue maybe. Susie? No. She's the one who got us both locked up, remember?" "Actually, that was my fault," Yue said. Lala squinted at her a beat. "Well, at least you take responsibility for things. More than I can say for the last captain." "Look, I'm sorry," Asuka bit her lip. "The plan wouldn't work without Lala's help." "You're always sorry, Susie, aren't you?" Asuka took the pointy end of Lala's steely gaze without flinching. The plan was dead on arrival without Lala. There was an ominous thud against the door, and everyone jumped. It sounded like someone was trying to break it down. An upside-down chair, stacked on the pile of furniture that was their makeshift barricade, toppled over with a clatter. "We have to try," said Yue. She winced as she massaged her feet. "We've come too far." "Fine," said Lala, going to the closest table and beginning to sort parts onto a dull metal utility tray. "But you'll need Yaz to drive it, and AM to design the engine." "We'll have to convince AM," said Yue. "They'll help," said Ruth. who might have been projecting confidence for Asuka's benefit. "Okay," said Lala. "But how are you even going to find them?" "I'm pretty sure AM's in the bridge," said Yingyue. "Yaz is probably in drone ops. My lobotomizer won't do much against the 30 delusional crew members between here and the bridge. It needs like a full minute of contact to work." As if prompted by her words, the door cranked apart an inch, and someone tossed their black smart glove through the crack. Must have thought it was more than it was. Molotov cocktail, or flash grenade, or who knew what. "I'm not going around the wheel," Asuka pointed up at the ceiling. "I'll go across it. If you can buy me an opening through them." The thumping had started again. Ruth grabbed her shoulder. "I'm coming with you." Asuka covered her hand with her own. Two of the others volunteered to track down Yaz. "There's no way I'm climbing a ladder like this," Yingyue indicated her pregnant body. "What can I do to help here?" "Oh, I'm sure I can find a use for you," said Lala. She dug through a pile of parts on the floor until she found a pair of small boxes. "We made these retro two-way radios a while back for fun. We can use them to stay in touch." She clipped it inside the neckline of Asuka's shirt. It squawked. Ruth hefted the lobotomizer. Lala's squad members went first, holding metal trays in front of them like shields. They pushed and shoved until they'd wedged a gap in the angry crowd massed outside. Asuka looked back into the shop once more. Lala focused on assembling the hopper, a whirl of activity as she fit everything together. Next to her, Yingyue passed her parts while she massaged her lower back and murmured promises to the twins inside her she might not be able to keep. Then Asuka made herself compact and low and squeezed through the gaps, twisting and wrenching and elbowing until she was through the crowd and at the ladder. She hauled herself up the rungs, dodging arms that tried to pull her down. Hopefully Ruth was not far behind. She reached the top. The ceiling hatch mechanisms were simpler than the ones along the passageway. No control panel, just a normal automatic release latch and a wheel affixed to the center of the hatch. She wrenched it clockwise. It took some effort and acrobatic balance, but it gave at last, screeching as it unsealed. Then Asuka was through and up, and Ruth with her. They shut the hatch against the roiling chaos below, hoping it was enough to give them a head start if anyone followed. Up they went through the narrow chute, scrambling hand over hand over hand. There was a clank below them as someone followed, but they were way above, already pulling themselves into the hub. Chapter 62. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion. B shift. It was quiet in the center of the ship. She entered cautiously, worried about whom or what she might find. But there was only one person there. Gabriella, eyes unfocused, hair fanning out around her. Asuka and Ruth negotiated with silent signals, then Asuka counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. Ruth grabbed Gabriella around the waist, and Asuka pressed the lobotomizer to her bunkmate's temple. Gabriella opened her eyes and began to scream. "Let me go! Stop!" Ruth growled as a fist socked her shoulder, but she didn't let go. They knew the lobotomizer had done its job when Gabriella went limp. Wearily, Ruth and Asuka backed away. A film of tears filled Gabriella's eyes. "Asuka, what are you doing here?" "Rescue committee," said Ruth. Gabriella touched her temple. Nothing happened. "What? She blinked, disoriented from being ripped from whatever reality she'd been in. Asuka bowed her head. "We fried your implant. I'm sorry." "You... Oh." Gabriella dropped her fingers from her temple like she didn't know what to say. She, who lived for the art of her augmentations. Asuka hoped they could fix it when all this was over. "We're headed to the bridge now. You'd better come with us." "The bridge?" "We'll explain as we go," Ruth said, already swimming for the next hatch. The radio in Asuka's shirt chirped. "Asuka, look out. There are 2 coming up behind you." The 3 of them were already on the move. Someone clambered up from the hatch. They heard them say, "Shit, that's a huge octopus. Oh my god, it's got me. It's got my ankle." They were banging into things, trying to wrest free of this imaginary horror. "You cut your implant out?" Gabriella asked as they began to descend. Asuka brushed her temple. Her face must have been streaked with blood, though they'd bandaged their heads with what they could scrounge from a med kit. Ruth filled Gabriella in as they went. As she talked, Asuka thought through the next stage in their plan. So many things that could go wrong. They reached the bottom. The passageway beneath the ladder was ominously empty. A few steps down, the airlock to the bridge was already open, and Asuka, Gabriella, and Ruth pressed up against the bulkhead, as if it might be possible to camouflage themselves among the articulation and pipes of the wall. Doubtful. AM emerged in the doorway, face shiny with perspiration. They looked smaller without their body augmentations. They grabbed their side, groaned, and stumbled a half step into the passage, then lifted their hand away and held it up to their eyes in horror. There was nothing, but they reacted to it with a half-contained sob. "Alpha? Am I dying?" Ruth shot Asuka a confused look. "They're in stabby sim," Asuka said. Ruth nodded in understanding. In the simulation, one of the crew grabs a razor and starts attacking people. It was one of the more difficult simulations, because it required more communication than action. Fortunately, this was not an actual sim. "Let's zap them," Asuka said, hefting Lala's lobotomizer. On the count of 3, they rushed forward, and Ruth grappled AM from the side, then moved so she was behind them with the officer's other arm pinned down. Gabriella wrapped her arms around both of them in a sad imitation of a group hug. AM struggled. "No, don't touch me. I'll kill you if you don't let go." Asuka held the lobotomizer against AM's temple. AM got an elbow free and whipped it up against Gabriella's jaw with an audible click, and Gabriella reeled back, clutching her face. Ruth grabbed AM's arm and bear-hugged AM tighter. "How long does this thing take?" Despite Ruth's size advantage, AM was freakishly strong. They'd recently gotten into weightlifting. "Well, I'd say you're not dying," Gabriella said. Her nose was gushing blood. It gave her face a ghoulish appearance. "Get off me," AM said. "I am the captain of the ship." "Yeah, about that, Yingyu is back," said Ruth, "and I think my girlfriend might dump me if I continue to support your mutiny." AM began to weep. "Oh, it's cool. You can still be first vice captain." "It's not my fault. I didn't kill them." Ruth's nostrils flared as she took a step back. "The hell?" "They're just confused," said Asuka. She had a theory of who might be behind all this, but she wasn't going to make any more accusations without proof. "Susie?" AM said, their eyes at last beginning to clear. They blinked at Asuka. "I thought you were..." "What happened to Tony?" She's dead, Asuka said. AM staggered forward one step. Oh, God, they said, then turned and hobbled back into the bridge. They followed at their heels, bumping into their back when the first vice captain stopped short at the threshold. They peered in. It was dim, lit by emergency lights. The walkie lay in pieces in the corner. Asuka's hope withered at the sight of it. From AM's reaction, they'd expected bodies and a floor soaked in blood. But the bridge was empty. I thought AM exhaled raggedly. They sank to their knees, clutching their ankle. Asuka bent to examine it. Maybe a sprain. What's happening to us, Susie? It was a sim. Asuka put a hand on their shoulder to steady them. Don't worry, Ruth said. You'll be back to ordering us all around in no time. Where is everyone else? Asuka wanted to know. AM tried to capture the wreckage in the swivel of their wrist. After the walkie was destroyed and Yume started going into labor, Braxton Hicks, Ruth said helpfully. Yeah, well, it was chaos. Someone needed to take charge. Nice weather for a coup, you think? I mean, don't get me wrong, I was right behind you. Asuka shot Ruth a warning look, but AM wasn't listening. They were staring off into space, remembering the last few hours. Big teardrops stuck to their thick, dark lashes. In fits and starts, they told them what happened after Yume left. Some of the other vice captains started to freak out. They wanted to reverse the ship back to Earth. Since we're not even halfway, said AM, theoretically we could try, but it would take a ridiculously long time at a much slower speed. Do you know how much time would have passed by the time we returned? Who would we even be going back to, assuming we can get there before our sleepy time juice runs out? Maybe we should, said Gabriella. Not on my watch. So, yeah, AM took over because someone had to, and that's how they'd been trained. Through brute force, they managed to get the crew back to the business of correcting course, no matter their own pessimism, because mission control or no mission control, that was what they were supposed to do. What are you going to say to Linda if we could make it back? And all the nations that put their money into this and are counting on us to make it? What do you think they'll think of us then? They demanded. No one had an answer to that. Of course not. And just when they had gotten everyone moving in the right direction, Yume called, saying she was fine and on her way back. And that triggered all sorts of debate among the officers again, when they didn't have any kind of time for that, which is why AM told her not to bother. They had it handled. And they might have. Maybe. Except then Dar went haywire, and they were submerged in that horrific simulation. Except they were the one with the razor, and everyone else was against them. And they had to fight people off them or die. And they thought, God, thank God it wasn't real. It wasn't, was it? They didn't know what happened to the others. They still weren't convinced they hadn't killed them. If you heard anyone like that, there'd be gallons of blood on the floor, Ruth pointed out. But it felt like... AM shuddered. During AM's story, Ruth had wandered over to the broken bits of walkie. She gathered the pieces tenderly and carried them to the table. Asuka thought of her mother, and for a moment, the pain of loss was so intense it took her breath away. She had to brace herself against a chair. I get you're not behind all this, AM told Asuka. Wow, did that hurt? To admit you were wrong? Ruth attempted to fit the key in its slot. There's a crack down the middle of the box. Asuka elbowed Ruth hard. "What do you want?" AM asked, trying to pull himself together. "Your help," Asuka told them. "I think I know how to get us back on course." AM stood, grimacing from the pain, but the old spark of obstinacy came back into their eyes. A hollow laugh broke free. "We already tried everything, and now, without Dar or Alpha, there's no hope." "I have to say, I kind of agree with them for once," said Gabriella, stirring the pieces of the walkie with her fingers. Asuka ignored her. She locked eyes with AM. "You're the propulsion expert, and you know the math better than anyone." AM opened their mouth again. "Will you stop being such a downer?" Ruth crossed her arms. "We can't make it to Planet X without working together." "Ugh, see? Look at the sappy shit you've made me say." The first vice captain stared at Ruth. "I was going to say, well, I guess we can't make the situation worse." "Oh. What do you need me to do?" Asuka exhaled. "Just your usual rocket science badassery?" A long pause as AM considered. "Fuck it. I'd like to see this guy again." Chapter 63. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion. B to C shifts. The radio crackled. "All right, Susie?" Asuka fumbled for the handheld, clipped to her shirt. "Is that Yingyue?" asked AM, looking up from the ankle that Gabriella was bandaging using the standard first aid kit strapped to the wall. Awkward silence, then, "Hiya, AM." Hi?" Ruth was enjoying AM's discomfort too much for someone who had contributed to their takeover, but then, Ruth always enjoyed a good fight. "We're okay. On our way back now." "Careful. We've been working through the crew, but it's a total mess out there." As if to underscore Yingyue's warning, the door of the bridge opened and shut as if it had jammed on something. Through the gap, they glimpsed Red, who was screaming silently at no one on the other side, a string of saliva suspended between his top and bottom teeth. Asuka shrank back. "We think Alpha's fighting this thing, based on the way people's behavior is fluctuating," said Yingyue. The door opened again, and Red knelt on the floor, clutching his stomach. "I got this," said Ruth, grabbing the lobotomizer from Asuka. "Watch it," said AM. "He's first trimester." Asuka went and got a chair and wedged it in the door. "Like I said," said Ruth. She leaped through the gap. As the door crunched down on the chair, Asuka heard Ruth say, "Easy does it." By the time Asuka and Gabriella clambered through with AM supported between them, Ruth already had gotten Red settled and was helping him to his feet. "That was kind of cool," said AM. They winced after accidentally putting their weight down on the wrong foot. "Thanks," said Ruth, giving the lobotomizer a twirl. Red rocked next to her, clutching himself. One of the blood vessels in his eye had burst, and he'd scratched long, angry tracks down his face. Gabriella reached out and took his hand. "Are we home?" Red asked. "Tell me it was all a nightmare." "Not all of it," AM told him, tone surprisingly gentle. "We're going to need you to hang in there a little longer." He stared down at his body, the monotonous black shirt and pants. "Our door is gone?" "Just another temporary suspension," AM assured him. Asuka lifted the radio to her mouth. She cleared her throat. "You still there?" "Still here," said their captain. "We're going to have to chance it and head around the wheel," said Asuka. AM was not in any shape to climb. "Have you been able to get to Yas?" "That's in progress." They began to make their way back through the wheel. Things seemed to have calmed down, as if their unknown enemy had given up this tactic and was regrouping, working on a new way to torment them. It left everyone tense, waiting for fresh horror to burst from the nearest compartment. Red insisted on coming. He seemed afraid the nightmares would return if he were left behind. Ruth dragged a chair along in case they needed to bash something. Her words. "You'd better put that back, though," said AM. "Absolutely," said Ruth. "Right after we fix all our problems, and then I sleep for 100 years. "Okay, but we never have enough chairs in the bridge," said AM. "Well, maybe if we didn't decide everything by committee." "Hang on," said Asuka. They were passing by crew quarters B. "I need to get something from my bunk." "Seriously?" Ruth said, but went to hack the door controls. Asuka darted into the room, making a beeline for her bunk. A cacophony of voices rolled over her. There were maybe 10, 12 people in the room. No one came for her, though. Most were holed up in their bunks, like that might offer any protection. No one was screaming, either. That was a plus. Something seemed to have changed. When she returned, the others stared at what she was carrying. "Old school," said AM. "You brought a Vizzy as one of your personal items?" Gabriella asked. "It was my brother's," Asuka said. She slipped it over her eyes, glad she'd taken the time to replace the worn-out elastic straps before launch. There was an audible ding as it turned on. And yes, she was standing in the middle of the sun-soaked lawns of Evenstar Academy. There, in the distance, was the old cottonwood tree. A warbler chirped nearby. A memory washed over her. Lying flat on her back, next to Trina and Ruth in the yard, daring each other to look at the sun. Before it was fashionable to replace the world with Dar, and it was still 90% real. A real hawk circling overhead, once, twice. And Trina had been talking about the importance of hope, and how that is what Evenstar was to people. Ruth, always ready to take the opposite side of a debate, had said, "Well, sure. But hope is a problem too, if it isn't real. I'd rather live a meter from despair if it gives me the kick in the butt to move forward." Asuka, too, tired to argue with either of them, had flopped over in the grass to watch an ant crawl to the top of a blade of grass. An ant knows all about hope, she had thought. She bent the grass to the base of another blade, and then began to climb again. Asuka pulled off the Vizzy. "What did you see?" Gabriella asked, longing sharp in her voice. "Evenstar," said Asuka. "And it wasn't on fire or smothered in undead ducks or anything. Guess you can't beat the original, eh?" She slung the Vizzy around her neck and started moving again, remembering how out of time they were. She hoped it was worth the detour. Back in the shop, the hopper was almost complete. Yaz was sitting on a low stool, her swollen feet propped up on a chair. She looked as pale and wrung out as the rest of them. They'd even managed to get some food from the kitchen, which was impressive, considering. People are still out of it, but they're minding their own business, Ginyu told them. Something's changed, and we don't know why. She paused and regarded AM warily. Captain, said AM, in a way that sounded like an apology. First Vice Captain. Yume's voice was the opposite of apologetic. She raised an eyebrow. Thanks for covering for a bit. AM shifted from foot to foot. It is not fun, let me tell you. No, it is not. Something passed between the two leaders, and then Yume said, Now that we've lost touch with mission control, no reason we couldn't write our own rules. Maybe set up rotating leadership. How about an election? Said Ruth. I never understood why we were founding a utopia with a dictatorship. I assume we're doing all this after we figure out how to salvage the mission, said Yaz. Since we have a shift left to figure this out. Right, said Yume. The machine Lala was building had taken over half the table. Lala had disemboweled one of the big bots. Its long, cylindrical body was still recognizable, and given its guts an upgrade from the looks of it. Half of the original parts were still strewn across the table. We're going to fix everything with that? AM asked. Lala stepped back and admired her own handiwork. Her fingers were covered in grease. Yeah, baby. Well, this and one other thing. What's that? The brand new miniature rocket engine you're going to build us. And like Yaz says, time's running out, so no pressure or anything. Chapter 64. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch. 3 cycles after explosion. C shift. Okay, people. Yume clapped for everyone to gather round. AM and Lala carried their Dr. Frankenstein machine back from the fireproof closet where the crew did all their welding. They set it down on the middle table with a dull clink. You owe me a big bot when this is all over, said Yaz from her seat in the corner next to Yume, feet propped on a box of screws. They'd all managed to tidy the shop in the last couple of hours, at least enough that they could walk around without breaking anything. The shop crew in the other corner was inventorying the damage with moans that weren't helping Asuka's anxiety levels. Yeah, said Lala. Relax. You'll get your precious baby back. Who knows? Maybe even with a few improvements. Everyone accounted for, Captain, Ruth said, setting the lobotomizer down. She'd been out with the squad, zapping implants. Gabriella and Red carted in a tray of tea. Its sweet, sharp scent filled the air as Gabriella poured. Oh my god, is that mint? Ruth asked, sniffing. She was particular about her teas. Claimed it was a British thing, but it was really a Ruth being snobby thing. We grew some in Ag A, said Red. May have harvested it a bit prematurely, but we figured we could all use something soothing right now. Asuka accepted a hot mug of light brown tea gratefully, the curling steam bringing the calming fragrance to her nose. Ready? Yume asked. AM and Lala nodded and stepped back. They had everyone's attention. So, this isn't a typical hopper, said Lala. Obviously. Hoppers usually use propellers, but since you can't generate lift without an atmosphere, we're using more conventional gas propulsion. The big difference here is that we jacked up the carrying capacity so it could move AM's device. Lala pushed it slightly so they could see the boxy engine that had been attached to the top of the bot. Looks great, babe, said Ruth, leaning in to kiss her cheek. What's the fuel? I thought we were out of extra. Methane discard from the air scrubbers, said AM, heroically managing to keep a straight face. "Our farts," Ruth laughed. "That's awesome." "More from the compost and stuff," said AM. "But basically." Yume nodded to Asuka. They'd spent the last few hours fleshing out their plan. The more she thought about it, the less confident she felt. More holes in it than an old t-shirt, and certainly not as comfortable. But this was her idea. Too late to turn back now. She activated a never-used LED screen on the far wall and pulled up a diagram of the ship. "We're a few degrees off right now, and doing a corkscrew path. So the first thing we need to do is straighten our line." AM nodded. "We were working on doing that with the altitude control system before all shit hit the fan. It should take maybe an hour." "Right. And then we need to bend back toward Planet X." "The problem," AM said, walking to the diagram, "is the micro-side engines aren't appropriately positioned and don't have the fuel capacity to do that second part. And we've lost one of our rear engines. Plus the others are empty." Asuka appreciated they didn't look at her when they said this. "We don't want to use the front engines because that would have the side effect of decelerating us 9 years early. So, we're going to fly the hopper out to here." They tapped the side of the shaft behind the wheel on the diagram. "Then have it fire a series of thrusts, reposition as needed. Bigger thrust than the micro engines and more control because it's not a fixed position." "I can fly it," Yaz said. "But will its legs be able to sustain that kind of force?" "Come on," said Lala. "You're dealing with a pro here." She gestured to the bot's legs. They extended across the table like tentacles, reinforced with new, larger feet affixed at each end that could adhere to the hull. "To make a long story short," said AM, "the plan is that we attach this home-jiggered thing to the side of our ship and hope it doesn't blow up in our face." "And you think this is going to work?" Gabriella asked. "Who knows?" Which was not the endorsement Asuka was hoping for. But she couldn't say it wasn't fair. AM downed their tea and set the mug down. "The math works." They all studied the diagram. Asuka tried not to hope too much. She wanted this to work so badly. "The only thing that worries me is that we still have someone out there who could muck with our system," Yume said. Gabriella nodded her delicate fingers together. "I could build some defenses." "That'd be great," said Asuka. "I can help," said Ruth. Gabriella covered her surprise. "I forgot you specialized in programming before." "Yeah. I wasn't half bad either. But how do we access the system without our implants?" "There are some spare vizies in medical," Asuka said. "Look at you, Onks," said Lala. "You've thought of everything." Asuka ducked, feeling her face heat. Ruth came with her to get the spares. The whole way, Asuka darted glances at Ruth, the question she knew she shouldn't ask crawling back to the tip of her tongue. Now that they were alone, she couldn't suppress it any longer. "What? Did Trina really cheat?" Asuka's gut did a flip. She was already wishing she could swallow her words. They'd only recently started to reconstruct their friendship. What was wrong with her that she had to knock it all down? Ruth didn't answer right away. They passed several crew cleaning up the aftermath. They waved from across the room, and Ruth and Asuka waved back, as if nothing at all were the matter. "I don't regret anything," Ruth said, but with a shred of a plea in her voice. Asuka swallowed hard. She thought of Trina's bright smile, their grand declarations about greatness, the way they lent Asuka clothes and shared their expensive coffee stash when they needed to stay up late, left her a new scarf on the bureau the first time it snowed, knowing Asuka didn't own one. Why did you do it? You can't change the past, why dig? But then Ruth sighed. They had cheated before. I didn't report it the first time. If they really did it that last time, I don't know for sure. It wasn't just that they were self-entitled, or their obliviousness to their enormously privileged upbringing, or the way they floated above all the misery. Unlike you, who broke your nails clawing your way up the mountain, or Mickey, who was propping them up, exam after exam. What if Mickey were expelled because the school thought she was complicit? But that wasn't why. The thing was, the game was zero-sum. We all were competing for the wildcard spot. And I thought to myself, Mickey and Asuka, or Trina? It wasn't even a choice. Asuka worked her jaw. This was the Ruth she'd always known. Strategic and ruthless, willing to accept collateral. A fierce love for her friends, and a moral compass that aimed to her own true north. It was what had drawn her to movements like SME, but Asuka didn't want to be angry at her friend anymore, because it was too late to change anything. I hate that you did it. They had reached the med-mod, but neither of them moved to the door. They stood there, balanced on this moment, waiting to see which way things would tip. You know, said Ruth, her usual swagger gone, voice cracking. I always thought we would go to Planet X together. I thought our friendship was like gravity or something, a law of nature. Asuka rubbed her chest. It felt like her heart was shattering all over again. But then you got in, and I didn't. And you just stopped talking to me. Ruth covered her face, then removed her hands and reached for Asuka's shoulders. Asuka stiffened, and Ruth retreated. I'm sorry. I freaked out. The truth was, I didn't know what to do. And I was afraid if I seemed upset at all, they'd go with someone else. It was too hard to even look at you. I kept seeing you, and thinking when I wake up, she'll be more than 10 years older. I'll miss her, and her life will already have gone on. She'll have new friends, an amazing career back on Earth. I needed to keep a clear head. Everyone else I could leave behind. But you were my best friend. Sobs shook Ruth's body, and Asuka relented and pulled her into a tight hug. She thought how there was nothing pure about love, after all. How it had to get muddy with misunderstanding. People like her mother, like Ruth, they would always be other stars, visible but impossibly far away. And she would have to settle for imagining she knew what they were like inside. That didn't make it any less real. I love you, Asuka said, into her shoulder. Even though sometimes you're an inferno. I love you too. Ruth paused. What do you mean an inferno? Chapter 65. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, sea shift. Lewis's Vizzy smelled faintly of sour plastic and disintegrating cloth, and was that hint of chlorine? Couldn't be. Asuka focused instead on the bite of the straps as she tightened them against her temple and ears. She looked through the window in the far wall, at Lala's hopper sliding down the chute and out. They were huddled in Yaz's drone ops mod, adjacent to the EAM. Yaz at the controls, Ying Yuan next to her, tugging at her earlobe. AM pacing nearby. Gabriella and Ruth monitoring the system for any sign of unauthorized activity, and Asuka, standing next to Lala as she watched the machine's stats. "Welcome back," Alpha said, voice tinny through Lewis's visi, and Asuka nearly jumped out of her own body. "Are you okay?" Asuka asked. "I've had better days," said Alpha. "How are you?" "Should we have switched her off?" Ruth asked her. "Isn't she a liability?" "Alpha does make things easier," said Yaz, "if we can trust her." "I have run a full system scan and do not believe I am corrupted," said Alpha. "Since you deactivated all of the implants, you are the only ones currently accessing DAR." "It wasn't your fault," said Yingyue. "Touching reunion and all, but we need to get going," said AM. "This better work," muttered Lala. "I cannot say this is the wisest of plans." "Good no one asked you then," said Ruth. "Listen, Alpha, I've learned sometimes you have to embrace the chaos," said AM. The hopper propelled out, with firefly flickers of miniature thrusts, bracketed by the deep velvet of space. They watched as Yaz guided it up along the radius of the wheel and coaxed it to the spot identified by AM. Someone whispered a prayer. Asuka held her breath like a wish until black spots began to form at the edge of her vision. The hopper moved along the shaft of the Phoenix. "Come on, baby," Lala said. "Crawl to mama." It jerked once, and Yingyue groaned. Then the bot settled down in the spot, legs unfurling and bracing until it was firmly anchored to the shaft between the wheel and the rear engines, like some fat tick. "Okay," said AM, checking the dash. "On my mark." Yaz flexed her hands on the controls. "Ready." And then, when Asuka thought she couldn't take it any longer, AM said, "Now." Darkness folded over them. They couldn't see a thing. "Zao," said someone, likely Yingyue. The clatter of someone removing their visi. "Alpha, I am here." "What the hell? Where is everyone? Can anyone else see?" An elbow dug into Asuka's arm. "Who's that?" she asked, grasping for them. A clunk as someone else tore off their visi, but Asuka waited in the dark. Her heart thumped in her chest. Had she been wrong? Then, her vision cleared, and they were standing in the old Even Star Practical Robotics Lab, Asuka's DAR. It was drizzling outside, and the grass was trampled and slick with mud. Puddles were forming in the middle of the lawn. Ruth sat in a chair behind the teacher's desk. On the whiteboard was a giant sketch of the ship. "Where's the hopper?" demanded Lala. Ruth gripped the sides of her chair. "The hopper is fine." Asuka's gloves felt damp and itchy from the sweat pooling on her palms. "What's going on then?" the captain said. She clutched her visi. Asuka regarded all of them. "One of us tried to mess with the bot," she said. A beat of silence as they absorbed this. Then they all were talking at once. "You think one of us is the killer?" Yingyue asked. "No pressure, but the clock is ticking," said Yaz. Lala set her jaw. "Better have proof this time, Susie." "It wasn't you," said Asuka. She wet her lips. To be wrong again. She couldn't be wrong. She went to Ruth. "You figured it out," said Ruth, leaning back in her chair. Yingyue had told her to consider every possibility, to not let personal feelings get in the way. She hadn't wanted to consider Ruth, but she made a certain sort of sense with her radical way of looking at the world. never bought into all the even store propaganda? It could have been her. The sounds of children's voices filtered up through the window. The peeling corners of a sun-bleached poster fluttered in an invisible breeze. Asuka turned to Ying Yue. The new captain had had her clashes with McMahon. Of all the people, she had benefited the most from what had happened, and there was the possibility she had lied about McMahon and mission control. Maybe McMahon had good reason to remove her, but she hadn't been close enough to the dining mod at the time of the explosion. Ying Yue stared at Asuka. Well, in the corner, Yaz planted herself in a chair, legs spread and arms folded across her belly. Yaz, the ever-competent one, who had been right next door in the clinic during the crucial window of time when the explosion went off. Ying Yue's trusted lieutenant in all things. Lala's brows knit together, and her nostrils flared. Her eyes glittered dangerously. And next to her, AM's fingers tapped against the desk. McMahon's closest friend and biggest rival. They had had their differences before, and everyone knew they had always wanted to be captain. Ruth squeezed Asuka's hand. The door opened, Hao Yu behind it. They froze in the doorway, pinned by 5 pairs of eyes, all but Asuka's, who was focused on Gabriella. Without looking away, she answered the captain. What I don't know is why. The other woman flinched. Gabriella? AM's voice was thick with disbelief. No, Gabriella said. But there was an expression in her face that Asuka recognized. Guilt. Chapter 66. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, sea shift. All atmosphere had disappeared from the room. Maybe gravity too. In the distance, she could hear the sweet, high chirp of a sparrow. No, said Lala, slamming her palms on the table. Are you going to accuse everyone on this ship before we're done? Okay. Asuka maybe deserved that. What if she was wrong? But she wasn't. She beckoned Hao Yu, who brought her a small box. Ruth, like in the old days, answered for her. She rapped the table with her knuckles. She tried to corrupt the bot's system controls. Fortunately, what she didn't know was that it was all a shell. She never touched the actual code. The real bot is still in the launch chute. What? Said Yaz in confusion. All that was just a simulation, said Ruth, gesturing at the wall. On their way back from the med mod, Asuka had revealed her suspicions, and they'd cooked up this plan. If Gabriella was the one behind this, they figured they couldn't let her touch the actual code. As one, they turned to Gabriella, hungry for an answer, a sign, a protest. Gabriella wouldn't meet their eyes. She stared out the window at the sun glinting off each too perfect blade of green grass. Alpha gave you away, Asuka said. She couldn't tell me directly because of the discretion rule in her therapy programming, so she dropped hints. It was the birds. When I asked what the anomaly was, she talked about bowerbirds, which build elaborate nests just for show. And then she kept trying to show me cuckoos, which are known for imitation. She was trying to tell me the anomaly we saw wasn't real, just a trap to make us investigate. A cuckoo is also an enemy in the nest that pretends to be something it's not, meaning the perpetrator was one of us. She showed me robins, which are experts at detecting infiltrators. And when I asked what happened to the remote, she talked about scrub jays, which are famous for their stashing ability. That's when I remembered when we first found you in the module, you were covered in them. Even then, she was trying to tell me you had hidden the remote there, with the intention of going back for it. She took the box Hao Yu had brought, and removed the scanner and the small packet of powder, and set both on the teacher's desk. Then Asuka reached into her pocket and produced the remote that Ruth had found. "So you were listening after all," said Alpha. Asuka managed to avoid dropping the remote. She'd forgotten that Alpha was still there. Hao Yu backed up against the door, as if they'd rather leave. They looked aghast. Yaz settled back in her chair, like she couldn't find a comfortable position. "It took me a while to figure it out. Alpha corrupted my DAR so I wouldn't use it, which protected me from you messing with it. At least until you upgraded my implant." "She upgraded everyone's implants," said Bruce with horror. Everyone had been greedy for the clearer resolution, the deeper illusion. When Gabriella didn't say anything, Asuka went to the whiteboard, which had a diagram of their ship. She tapped the dining mod with her finger. "You took some of the materials in between shifts. A lot of people were in and out of the shop, so no one thought much of it. They thought you were hooking up with one of the shop crew. You assembled the explosives from the chemical fertilizer from one of the ag mods and printed the rest in the lab. As one of the people who regularly volunteered for cooking, it wouldn't even have been weird for you to be in the ag mod. People thought you were just there to get microgreens or whatever. The lab is often empty. And lastly, you swiped a drill. Lala's." Lala snapped her fingers. "Yes! I was helping Hao Yu break into sperm storage in the med mod, and I left it there. When I went back later, it was gone." "You were what?" asked Yue, struggling to lean forward. "Okay, I am embracing chaos," AM muttered. Lala tugged her earlobe. Hao Yu was shooting her panicked, abort looks. Yeah. Oops. So we did that. It was to prevent the captain from messing any more with the vials. Which explained the patched compartment that Asuka had seen in the med mod. Gabriella had a checkup after, Hao Yu said, in a blatant effort to steer back to the main subject. She must have taken it then. Gabriella wiped tears from her cheeks with one arm. She hadn't made a sound. Asuka nodded. It was the last piece Gabriella needed. It's hard to guarantee any privacy on a ship this size. The shift cycles mean someone's always awake. The dining mod was perfect because you had it, and the kitchen mod to yourself when you were on cooking duty. You took Lala's drill, and you made holes in a rectangular pattern in the outer wall to weaken it so you could use a smaller bomb and contain the damage when it blew. In the drilling process, you caused a leak, but you had messed with the sensor so it wouldn't register anything until you were ready. I'm guessing you didn't do it in the kitchen because you were, like the rest of us, traumatized by Scenario 4. Then you let the cleaning bot eat the drill and take it back into the hole to eventually be junked. Good hiding place until Hina threw up and it swallowed another tool. Gabriella sunk deeper in her chair, elbows digging into the desk so her hands covered her face. Why kill Tony? Asked AM, voice hoarse. McMahon wasn't meant to be there. Winnie summoned her to confront her about the pharmaceutical upgrade. Even then, they should have both gotten out. But she and McMahon were arguing, which is why they didn't follow the sensor warning right away. No, her target was the ship. The captain ordered me to do the spacewalk, but Kat volunteered. Anyone could have, so she wasn't a target either. The timing was what mattered, and the opportunity. Gabriella's nails dug into the skin around her eyes. The bombs were built with a remote radio trigger, which would have left no trace in the ship's system records. Asuka nodded at Lala. You said the range was maybe 2 modules wide? That's right. Asuka picked up a pen and drew a rough circle around the dining and kitchen mods, and 2.5 modules on either side of the dining mod. Kitchen, sanitation, Ag A, Ag B, exercise, crew quarters C and D, bot shop, and medical. So someone was standing in one of these modules, close enough to set it off. But also, Asuka drew another circle around the eam, far enough away from here that they didn't set off the rest of the bombs, which were very much still live when Yaz and I found them. That eliminates crew quarters. Okay, so the traitor was in one of the 7 modules. Gabriella was here in Ag A. She pressed the trigger. Bomb went off. At that point, the ship was in chaos. Gravity was messed up. She had to stash the remote somewhere no one would think to look right away, at least to buy enough time for her to come back for it. Like, buried in one of the trays in Ag A. Except she didn't factor in that the jolt of the explosion had torn some of the floor bolts loose, and when she went to do it, the shelving unit came down. Asuka went back to the remote and began to sprinkle powder over it, so every inch of the surface was covered. You are doing great, Alpha said, which explained why Asuka felt horrible. Gabriella shook her head slowly, but she didn't say anything out loud. The thing was, I don't think you were trying to kill anyone, said Asuka, or even damage the ship that badly. That's why you didn't just set the bomb off inside the ship and why you used the drill. You even triggered the sensor so people with meal shifts stopped going to the dining mod. It was just bad luck that Winnie and the captain were arguing and ignored the alarm. Asuka blew the powder off. There they were, fingerprints. Silence stretched out, long and taut. You never meant to hurt anyone, right? Gabriella, eyes pinned to the desk, nodded once. Her face was stone, but her soft lips trembled. Except someone was always going to get hurt, said Yingyue, pushing herself up. Her voice was angrier than Asuka had ever heard. Because someone had to wear the toolkit. I thought it would be Asuka. She said it so softly, they almost didn't hear her. Asuka, the alternate, the one who wasn't meant to be here. The fuck? Said Ruth, half rising like she meant to lunge at Gabriella. Asuka raised a hand. I've thought about this 100 times since the explosion, because it should have been me. If it had been me carrying the kit, I wouldn't have kept it strapped on. Gabriella knows that because she's done spacewalks with me. I anchor it to the ship. Because I'm small, it's hard to move my arms with it strapped to my chest. So, there was a chance, if it were me, that I would come out of this okay. Except Kat insisted on carrying the kit this time. And Kat got there faster than I thought, whispered Gabriella. I panicked. Because Kat and Asuka had been racing. I warned them, said Alpha in anguish. Everything went so wrong, said Gabriella. But you got what you wanted, didn't you? Asuka said. The ship was knocked off course. No, said Gabriella, voice small. What I wanted was to go home. Messenger pigeon, Asuka said, lifting her chin to the ceiling. Manx Shearwater, both known for their remarkable homing abilities. Yes. Silence returned, heavier than before. But you all were so intent to get back on track and keep going, Gabriella went on bitterly, when we could have turned around, and I knew Susie would figure it out. That's why you needed to fix my door with your upgrade, and then I started seeing things that weren't there. Gabriella hung her head. I wanted to distract you, put you off. I was scared. And you took away all my birds, Asuka said. Okay, but how did you destroy the walkie? AM asked, getting up to examine the board schematic. Gabriella hunched even smaller. I didn't. You did. What? AM recoiled, nearly tripping over the table. I altered your door so you thought it was one of the bombs. Don't you remember? You knocked out the communication specialist and threw it across the room, thinking you were saving everyone's life. AM covered their mouth and whimpered. Oh my god. What about in the passage, when the atmosphere vented? You could have killed me. And I saw Kat. It was just an illusion, Gabriella said. You wouldn't stop picking and picking at the threads. If you stopped me, this whole nightmare would be for nothing. Outside the window, the rain had turned to snow, and it was coming down, thick and fast. But underneath the door, the sounds of the ship reality were there, if you listened. Gabriella turned back to Asuka and lifted her chin a fraction. The arrogance to think we could travel this far, that we know everything. Why do we deserve to be here? I don't, said Asuka, voice thick with emotion. She felt Ruth's hand on her back, and she was grateful for it. We don't, but we are. I'm sorry, said Gabriella, her voice caught. She dropped her gaze. This is all well and good, said Yaz, her voice cutting into everyone's thoughts, but we have a mission to finish. We can deal with all of this later. She arched an eyebrow at Ruth, who banished the classroom view. Their homemade hopper filled the screen again. Back in the chute, as if their whole sense of self hadn't just been shattered. Yaz pressed the launch button to initiate. Wait, said Gabriella, but it was too late. Flames erupted, and they heard from a few mods away the sound of a muffled boom. Chapter 67. The Phoenix, 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion, C-shift. This wasn't a simulation. They felt the vibration through their feet. Fuck, said Ruth. In a moment, they were all running to the EAM. Ruth and AM had the good sense to grab Gabriella and drag her along. The EAM smelled acrid, like electrical fire. Smoke seeped from the bot launcher hatch in the wall. They began to cough, eyes watering from the fumes. A swarm of extinguisher drones descended on it, spraying white foam. Alpha, report, said Yingyue, pulling on her spare Visi again so she could hear Alpha's response. Lala grabbed a spare shirt from one of the compartments and was trying to fan the smoke. Alarms were going off. Asuka's Visi squeaked. Then Alpha said, There has been an explosion in the bot launch chute. Please evacuate the area. How did you get past my shell simulation? Ruth rounded on Gabriella. But Gabriella was staring at the hatch with shock, like the rest of them. Gabriella shrank back. I didn't do anything. This time. She seemed genuinely horrified. Which big bot did you cannibalize for the hopper? It was Petunia, wasn't it? Petunia, with the same big bot Asuka had driven in the failed mission to fix Engine 3. "Yeah?" said Lala. "Why? Did you keep the same drive?" Yaz slapped the wall, hard. "That's why Asuka's engine misfired. Petunia's alignment program was off. Petunia must have rammed against the inside the launch chute." "Fire extinguished," Alpha told them. "I vented the chute. It is sealed and clear for access again." "You did what?" shrieked Lala. She went to the launch chute and seized the handle, then cursed and flapped her hands. Ruth tossed her a pair of thick gloves from the suit rack, and she was able to pry open the door. It took a few minutes for the smoke to clear from the chute. When they peered down it, there was nothing to see. Empty. Petunia had to be out of range by now. "Well, shit," said Ruth. "Now what do we do?" "We don't have enough time to build another one," said AM. They pulled up the timer so everyone could see it, angry and red and ticking down. 2 hours until they were out of the viability zone. "I think we have to face it. We've tried everything. The mission is over." Ruth turned around and grabbed Gabriella by the front of her shirt. "What the fuck did you do?" she screamed. Asuka moved in to pull her off, but Lala got there first. She swaddled Ruth with her arms and pressed her lips against that delicate silhouette of the crow on her head. "Shh, won't change anything now." Gabriella hugged herself. "Stop," said Yingyue. And there was something new and sturdy in her voice. "The mission is not over, because there is more to this mission than Planet X. Whether we get there, whether we don't. Don't you get it? What we are is an idea. No matter what, with each moment that passes, we have gone further than any human being has ever gone into space. Maybe ever will. That still means something." Ginyu had traced the curvature of her abdomen. Asuka wondered if she was thinking about how her children might live their whole lives in confinement. This ship would be their tomb, because eventually they would die, gasping in contaminated air or slowly baking as the temperature regulation broke down. The captain looked at each of them in turn. "If our fate is to travel a little further than we planned, we can't afford to keep fighting each other like this. This whole living in our own jars, it hasn't been a good thing. It's time to live together. We can do that. We have a chance now to make our own world with our own rules. And that includes deciding what to do with you." She focused on Gabriella. "I can't say I understand what you did, or why. I can't say I forgive you either, but right now there's one problem that matters, and that's getting back on course. We've trained for this. We're damn resourceful. We can figure it out. In the meantime, Susie, take Gabriella to the nursery." Asuka took her arm, but Gabriella didn't resist. She was crying hard, snot running down her face. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to go home. Please believe that." As they turned to go, Yaz let out a grunt of pain. "Are you okay?" Yingyue asked her. "I think the baby's coming." Chapter 68. The Phoenix. 3,983 cycles after launch, 3 cycles after explosion. Sea shift. It was a long walk to the nursery. Crew were hanging out in the corridor, legs splayed across the floor. It wasn't a party so much as a funeral, minus the plate of cookies. Grief stuck to everything like hot tar. They wanted to know how the course correction had gone. What could Asuka say? We're still working on it. As soon as they reached the nursery, Gabriella sagged into one of the chairs. You didn't tell them about me, she said. Asuka shrugged. She picked up AM's plush dinosaur and studied its round plastic eyes and purple fur. I hope Yaz is okay, Asuka said. This was the fear they'd all pushed to the side when they'd agreed to this mission. Sure, the medical team was extensively trained in obstetrics, but there was no comparison between giving birth in a spaceship and a well-equipped hospital back home. Not to mention, they wouldn't be able to consult mission control if anything went wrong. No, Yaz would be fine. They had plenty of detailed simulations in the ship drive to guide them through the scenarios. Why did you come on this mission? Gabriella asked, interrupting her thoughts. What? You seemed so miserable during final training. Asuka flushed with embarrassment. She hated the thought that her pain and anxiety had been so obvious, but of course everyone would know. I was in a spat with Ruth, and my mother... She choked on the sentence. Her mother, who would never know what became of her, who was in jail now because of her. And yet you decided to come. Asuka winced and sat down. I had a brother, Lewis. He wanted to go to space more than anything, but he couldn't. That old wave of sorrow washed over her. Even years later, her grief for Lewis was a tidal pool, there around the ankles, rising and falling but never quite taking her out to sea. I see, said Gabriella, eyes deep with empathy. And Asuka both hated and appreciated that. It struck Asuka as so absurd that someone like Gabriella, known for her kindness and her generosity, would be the one who destroyed them. And she began at last to feel angry. Was it all performative? She didn't want Gabriella's understanding. She wanted to know the truth. When did you decide to do it? Gabriella shrank back, as if Asuka's gaze was too much for her to handle. I deserve that? Tears began to seep again. I have had 2 younger sisters. My sister Cora begged me not to go. The 3 of us were so close, even when I went to the academy. We talked every day. But I got swept up in everything we were told, that we were special, chosen, the best of the best. I believed what I wanted to be true. I didn't think about the harm of going. The great hole we were tearing when we left. I told myself they would be fine, since they had each other. And we'd be able to talk every day through the walkie. Not the same, of course, but good enough. And then I woke up, and Cora she died. When the sea came over the seawalls and drowned half of Manila. And our part of the city was gone. Too expensive to pump it out. I'm sorry, said Asuka, embarrassed at how little she'd read of the news from the last 11 years. Gabriella wasn't done. It turned out that the great seawall they'd built was 2 meters shorter than the scientists had recommended. Why? Because of money. The whole country was swimming in debt from paying for this vanity mission. It made me so angry to know that. The thing was, for me, it's like she died yesterday. For my sister Ligaya, it was 7 years ago. All she wanted to talk about was this ship. What it was like, what do we eat, how do we sleep. No detail too boring. Being my sister had made her a celebrity. I would have thought now that we're on our way, people might forget about us, right? But it's not like that. Everyone is even more obsessed. Because we give them hope, said Asuka, thinking of her mother's letter. Yes, said Gabriella. And that's the problem. They've been distracted when they should be focused on what they can still do to save themselves. They were both quiet for a long moment. That's why you did it? Asuka asked. Gabriella nodded. I thought if we turned around, they'd wake up, stop fighting, and get to work. But then, when you all were so determined to get back on course, I thought, if I destroyed the walkie, at least they would never know. Even if we did find our way again, they'd have to live with not knowing. Asuka hugged the plush dinosaur one last time. It smelled like baby powder and the dry, cottony promise of future tears and runny noses. She returned it to its place in the cabinet, then searched all the compartments until she found the neatly stacked bundles of newborn onesies and diaper cloths. Yaz would need these soon, assuming everything went well. It would. She needed to stop assuming the worst. The clothes reminded her of one piece of the puzzle she hadn't been able to figure out. What was with the letter that Ruth found from the 3rd grade class? Gabriella scratched her nose, embarrassed. It's not my secret to tell, but the teacher is Hina's boyfriend back home. They encrypt their love letters and pictures. I realized it when I was doing the forensics, and then I deleted it so no one would realize it had been a false alarm. Wow, said Asuka, thinking how they had undermined their first course correction attempt for nothing. Another thing she bungled. If they had done that mission with Alpha's assistance, would they have succeeded? But no. Gabriella had corrupted Petunia's alignment program. She set the newborn clothes on the table. The thing is, Asuka said, I don't think this mission is really about preservation. It's about opportunity. History isn't this linear upward trajectory. It rises and falls. The Dark Ages, the Enlightenment, fascism, we climb and then we fall, each time higher, each time lower. World War II, a United Nations, nuclear proliferation, Festival of Love, and now this new World War. Here's what I know. Progress has never been guaranteed. People take it for granted. But there's no certainty our time on the planet won't end with us holding a stone axe and just running around naked while the seas swallow everything. But sometimes, there is one moment where you can go to the moon, or Mars, or do a mission like this. And at that moment, you have a choice. You can go, or you can stay. Like we were at the crest of a giant wave, and we could either grab a board and surf it as far as we could go, or we could let the wave come down over us. That's why we're out here, looking for something more, something beyond ourselves. It's what Lewis had loved about space, what he dreamed of as they sat in that refugee camp while a coast of ancient forest burned down. She opened her hands. But also, how often in human history have you had the whole world pursuing a common purpose? And this mission proved, at least continues to prove, that it's possible. If only she could have explained this to her mother. I never knew you were a philosopher, Asuka-chan. I hate philosophy. Anyway, it's too late, isn't it? I already ruined everything. Asuka checked her messages. It didn't seem like they'd made any headway. What do you think they'll do with me? I don't know. You heard Yingyue. We have to make our own rules from here on out. Gabriella wiped her face with her shirt. Through the cloth, her voice was muffled and high. I want to die. I can't live like this. After the explosion, you know, I thought about stepping out the airlock, except her shoulders drooped. I found out I was pregnant. Asuka stared at her, waiting to feel the old spike of envy, but she didn't. That's great. Can you imagine, though? They'll live their entire life in this spaceship. Never see a sky, never feel rain or wind on their face. No Earth, no Planet X. We're going to die out here. Asuka ran a hand along the crib rail. There's still time. There has to be a way. The roll of the chair was loud against the floor as Gabriella continued to rock back and forth. What if there were a way? Gabriella said, voice soft as a cobweb. You didn't dismantle all of the bombs, did you? Chapter 69. The Phoenix. 3,984 cycles after launch. 4 cycles after explosion. A shift. No way, said AM. Asuka stood in the bridge, surrounded by Yue and the vice captains, minus Yaz, who would have come anyway, in labor or no, if Yue hadn't barred her. She and Ruth had barged into the officers' brainstorming session, because it was now or never if they wanted to try this last, truly absurd plan. Ruth took her hand, and Asuka squeezed it back. She had gone to Ruth first, needing the confidence of her friend, and the backup for these officers, who were looking at her right then with a range of skepticism and outright hostility. Some of them still didn't trust her, despite Yue and AM's assurances. Unfortunately, that didn't extend to going along with Asuka's proposal. We can't trust Gabriella. Okay, not a surprise. Too dangerous. Also fair. You want more people to die? You want all of us to be stuck nowhere for the rest of our lives? Ruth retorted. Gabriella's idea was simple, obvious, and easy. It was by no means elegant. Take one of the remaining explosives she'd rigged, place it on the exterior of the ship, and detonate. Carefully, exactly placed, it should put them close enough to being back on course that their micro-side engines could bring them into final alignment. Alpha had already calculated the force, position, and timing. AM acknowledged the math checked out, but they were opposed because of the risk, as were the rest of the officers. Asuka's heart pounded. She felt in her bones this was their last chance, and here they were wasting their time. Yue sat, elbows on the table, and pinched the bridge of her nose with her fingers, while the debate washed over her. Exhaustion had left her face pale and puffy. Quiet, people, Yue said. I want to hear Susie. And the room quieted. It's Asuka, said Ruth. What? Her name. They all looked at Asuka, baffled. Well, yeah, said Asuka, scratching her nose. Oh, said Yue. Sorry, Asuka. Please, go ahead. We don't have time for a better plan, Asuka said. I'll be careful. We'll be careful, Ruth said, flicking a glance at her. Careful? Yue's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Well, Asuka's voice faltered. This was the thing that made her sweat, just thinking about it. She tucked her palms under her arms. After what happened with Petunia, it's too risky using another big bot. And Yaz is in labor, so... The captain groaned. So you're suggesting strapping a bomb to your chest, going out there, slapping it to the side of the Phoenix, and somehow not blowing yourself or anyone else up in the process? Asuka, said AM. Listen, I think if someone could do it, it would be you. But it's like poker. You've got to know when to fold. Our primary concern at this point should be figuring out how to extend habitability for as long as possible. Asuka focused her attention on Yingyue, trying to telegraph confidence across the projection table. Convincing the captain was her last hope. This whole mission was a long shot from the get-go. This won't be the last risk we ever have to take, but if it works, we can still make it to Planet X. Think about all our children who will be born on this ship. This is the difference between growing up in a tin can or under a big sky in a new world. Isn't that worth a lot of risk? It was worth the risk of getting on this ship in the first place and leaving everyone and everything we love behind. She saw the flicker in some of their eyes now. She had them, because quitting didn't come naturally to any of the Phoenix crew. I, for one, didn't work half my life for this mission only to give up when things got hard, Ruth added. If I wanted risk without reward, I could have stayed on Earth. Yingyue's chin nodded a fraction, small enough to miss, but Asuka saw it. Her heart lifted. Can we trust Gabriella? Definitely not, someone said. Beside her, Ruth shifted. She had her own doubts about this. They both had. There was no way to know. Everything Gabriella did was about sending a message back to Earth. Now that the walkie's destroyed, it doesn't matter. So she has no reason to stop us. Anyway, she wouldn't be involved in the operations, so you don't have to trust her. Just trust your math. Yingyue turned back to her first vice captain. What do you honestly think the chances of success are here? Asuka waited. This'll be good, murmured Ruth. AM worried their bottom lip between their teeth. Their eyes narrowed as they considered the odds. 50-50, they said at last. Asuka exhaled, more generous than she thought. Assuming I'm the one managing this mission. Otherwise, who knows? AM crossed their arms and squared their jaw. Since Yaz is busy, you're going to need someone. Well, since everyone else is signing up, consider me in, said Ruth. I'm spacewalk eligible, and since the walkie's destroyed, I'm basically an alt now too. Asuka tried and failed to suppress a grin. She could have sworn even AM's lips quirked. Okay. Yingyue pushed herself to her feet. If we're going to do this, well, let's do this. Chapter 70. The Phoenix, 3,984 cycles after launch, 4 cycles after explosion, A shift. Let us out, said Ruth. Alpha was refusing to open the exterior airlock. This is very dangerous. I cannot protect you out there. Alpha was indignant. Come on, Alpha. It's me, said Asuka, trying to make her voice sweet. If they could get through this door, she felt weirdly optimistic. She was thinking, for once, if anyone can do this, I can. She'd logged more spacewalk hours than anyone. She stood clad in her compression suit. Ruth, in matching spacewalk gear, faced her. I don't mean to rush you, said AM's voice, dripping with sarcasm. But we don't have infinite time. Alpha is being difficult, Asuka said. Alpha, open the damn door. Ruth gave the hatch an ineffectual kick. I am sorry. I cannot allow you to put yourself in harm's way. Also, it is your sleep shift. You should be sleeping. Is Alpha still corrupted? Ruth asked. Asuka groaned. No, this is Alpha fixed. If Gabriella hadn't messed with her protocols, she might have stopped Asuka and Kat from going out in the first place. Ying knew his voice, coaxing. I'm sorry, Alpha, but you have to let them go, or we'll shut you off again. Alpha sounded unhappy. My job is to take care of you and take care of the ship. I cannot allow you to damage it or put yourself at risk like this. Forget this, said Asuka. She went to the wall and grabbed the heavy manual switch and pulled it down. It seemed to fight her all the way. This is an unauthorized exit from the ship, said Alpha. I will be recommending disciplinary action. We don't need your permission, said Ruth. We are bloody adults. Asuka flexed her hands inside her gloves and then picked up the remaining bomb, packaged inside a toolkit again. Ruth helped strap it to her chest. Her friend's mouth was taut with fear. It's all right, Asuka whispered. We'll be okay. I'd say don't do anything risky out there, said Ruth, but that's literally the point of this mission. She leaned forward and seized Asuka's helmet, put her own up against Asuka's. They grinned at each other. Killdeer, said Ruth. You know it, said Asuka. She stepped forward into the airlock, and Ruth followed. Beyond the outer door, cold vacuum waited for her like an old friend. Okay, I can see you're upset, Alpha was saying. Why don't we stop and talk about this? But her voice was already receding. Ruth shut the airlock door. The blue light of the ship's interior shrank to the small square window in the inner airlock door. Ship sounds became muffled. Hissing filled their ears. Can Alpha stop us? Ruth asked, voice tinny through the helmet radio. Asuka felt as if a fog in her brain had lifted. No. She grabbed the small wheel on the outer airlock door. Our ship, our mission. The light in the center of the door turned green, and Asuka leaned in and turned the wheel with the weight of her body. There was a dull clunk, and then the door released. But we'll have to let ourselves back in, since we've overridden Alpha's access. She shivered, remembering the last time she was out here and nearly died. Shook herself once to shed the feeling. Outside, the stars moved steadily around the ship. Is it too late to mention I'm afraid of heights? Ruth asked. Yes, said AM from the other end of their radio. Don't look out, Asuka advised. At the entire universe? Do like an ostrich, meaning keep your head down, she heard Ruth groan behind her. Asuka resisted the urge to fiddle with the bomb strapped to her chest and began to walk along the scaffold rim to the ladder. They each had a tether that ran through a loop in their belt, with clips on either end. The rule was to keep one clip attached at all times to the catwalk or ladder. The propulsion packs on their backs could help, but it was no simple maneuver to re-alight on a turning wheel. Better to be careful. Asuka's legs felt leaden as she moved in the bulky suit. I hope you've been keeping up with your exercise. Like a beast. Though come to think of it, I haven't seen you in the exercise mod much. I've been busy, Ruth cackled. If you could cut the chatter and pick up the pace, that'd be great, said AM. We've got about 20 minutes on the clock. You're welcome to come join us. The swagger was back in her friend's voice. Silence. Then, how's the drilling going? AM was asking Lala and Hina, who were parked in the dining mod, drilling a pattern of holes in the outer wall at the spot AM and Alpha prescribed. Fine, said Lala. We're halfway through. What could possibly go wrong? Asuka and Ruth began to climb, boots silent against the metal grate of the ladder rungs. Yaz hadn't had time to fix the gap in the lower catwalk that ran along the wheel, and the chosen spot for the bomb was halfway up the dining mod wall. That meant, to get to there, Asuka needed to rappel down from the inside rim of the earth-facing side of the wheel. The ladder ran between the outside and inside of the wheel, next to the airlock door. Its rungs were spaced wide for the clumsiness of the boots, but the trade-off was that it required more of a reach to climb. The space outside had the same muteness of a world blanketed in fresh, powdered snow. Up they went. Shit, said Ruth. She'd missed a rung with her hand and was dangling one-armed from the ladder. Asuka looked for Ruth's tether, but it trailed uselessly out. A rookie move, trying to climb too fast without keeping one end of the tether clipped, but then Ruth didn't have as much spacewalk experience. I can't get a good grip, Ruth cried. Panic thickened her voice. Her fingers were slipping. Asuka checked her own tether clipped to the ladder and looped through her belt. The other end of it was in her hand. Help! Ruth cried. In a quick, decisive movement, Asuka let go. She dropped down past Ruth, sliding along the ladder rail with her right hand. There was a sharp tug at her waist. The second clip caught against the belt loop and held. She was below her friend now. She pulled herself back onto the ladder and grabbed Ruth's right boot, guiding her back to the rung. Jesus, said AM. All good, Asuka told her. Yep. Ruth's voice caught, like she couldn't quite believe it. Though I may have peed myself. You think you're the first? Asuka said. 12 minutes, said AM, voice tense. They continued up the ladder. Most of the ship modules were just under 2.5 meters high on the inside, but on the outside, they were significantly taller, thanks to the storage, wiring, piping, insulation, and protective layer. Their last, likely futile, line of defense if radiation or space dust got through their other measures. By the time she reached the inside of the wheel, Asuka's body felt lighter. She climbed over the edge and stood up, boots planted on the curving plate. The stars wheeled around them, above, below, ahead, behind. Holy shit, breathed Ruth, standing beside her. We really are here, aren't we? I know what you mean. Because this was better than anything in Door. The empty, eternal night that enveloped them. The dull, metal hull beneath their boots as they moved along. Asuka cleared her throat, uncomfortable with the silence. It was all she could hear, besides Ruth. Like they were the last two people left in the universe. This is like I used to dream when I was little, Ruth said. Being out here in space. An astronaut. I appreciate my parents were always supportive. Now I wonder why they ever let me go, knowing they wouldn't see me again. They wanted you to be happy. said Asuka, like her own mother. They reached the spot as Lala finished drilling. Are you sure we're close enough? Ruth asked AM, peeking over the edge. They switched their helmets to infrared and saw hot ship air emanating in a red plume. Already, air was leaking out through some of the tiny holes. No doubt Alpha was freaking out. It did seem far away. It's basic math. Their propulsion expert sounded offended. The key was to lower herself ahead of the target, then let the turn of the wheel angle her to the right spot. Okay, this is the tricky part, Asuka said. She moved closer to the rail and pulled a longer cable from her bag. I thought all of this was the tricky part. Ruth helped her clip it to her harness and then her own, both of them fumbling with thick gloved fingers. They checked the clip again. Then Ruth sat down and braced 2 feet against the post, holding tight on her end of the belay. In position. Hurry, Asuka, said AM, voice pinched. They've evacuated the module. Now you've got 7 minutes to stick that thing on and give it a boom. Asuka clipped to the post, then ducked under. When she was straightened, she was hanging on to the back of the rail, feet against the edge of the habitat wheel. Well, she said, looking at Ruth. She couldn't see her friend's eyes. Starlight glittered off her faceplate. See you, I guess. She leaned out and began jump skittering down the side of the wheel. The turn of it pulled her sideways with every jump, her long tether taut. Got you, Ruth grunted in her ear. Jump, slide, jump, stumble, and slide. Nearly there? AM said, who was watching her progress from one of the exterior cams. Asuka lost purchase with her feet and skidded up against the exterior of one of the bulkheads. Her shoulder twanged, and her eyes watered in pain. You okay? Yume asked. Yep. She flexed her fingers around the rope. Ruth let her down a few centimeters more. There you go, AM said. It's right in front of you. Asuka stared at the plate of the hull. She sat in the harness, knees scraping, and switched back to infrared. Red wisps leaked from a few places. Never mind. This is the tricky part. She unstrapped the toolkit and let the magnetic strips along it affix to the metal plating at the spot AM had dictated. She thought of how Gabriella assumed this is what she would have done. If only it had been Asuka before. A centimeter to the left, AM said. Asuka moved. You got it. Asuka removed a bolter from the outside of the kit and affixed the strap. Wouldn't do to have it knocked loose somehow. Then she tested it. Good. Now get out of the way. The idea was for Asuka to continue down to the walkway and then come back the long way around the wheel. She checked her oxygen. 60%. It would be close, but she would be quick. Ruth began to lower her again. Quickly, said AM. Asuka needed to be clear of the blast in 2 minutes. They needed a very specific amount of atmosphere left in the module, and the trigger hit at the exact right moment. Asuka looked down as she went. The walkway was about 4 feet from her. She waited for more lead on her cable, but nothing happened. Asuka tested it. What's up? You're caught. Jesus, stop. It's the bomb. Your cable's tangled on the outside of the kit. Asuka stopped tugging immediately. She heard everyone swearing over the radio. In her helmet, she saw the clock ticking down. 30 seconds left. She still was too close for comfort. We should call it off, Yume said. My mission, said AM. Asuka, do you trust me? Yes, she said, because she had to. What choice did she have? I want you to unclip and let yourself fall. You'll land on the walkway. Asuka's hands tingled. Okay, she said, hoping she didn't sound as scared as she felt. If she missed, do it now. Asuka fumbled with her clip. Her gloved fingers were so clumsy. It was too hard, with the whole weight of her body pulling on the cable. The timer ticked down. 15 seconds. 10. 5. She needs to move, she heard Ruth say. With a final desperate twist, Asuka unbuckled the whole harness and tumbled out, feet catching. 3, 2, 1. Behind her, she heard nothing, but she saw the walkway flash bright as it rushed up to meet her. Chapter 71. The Phoenix. 3,984 cycles after launch, 4 cycles after explosion, A shift. She hit the walkway with a nauseating crunch, maybe broke her right arm. The pain blotted out everything. People were screaming her name. Too loud. She hadn't heard a blast, but of course not. The problem with space was nothing. You couldn't hear a thing. I'm okay, she said around a mouthful of blood. She must have bitten part of her tongue when she landed, but that was not the piece of her that hurt the most. Her arm was on fire. Back stung. Shrapnel may have pierced her compression suit. Get up, Asuka. All the softness had gone out of the captain's voice. Asuka gritted her teeth and pushed herself up with her left hand flat against the grate. She was kneeling, then sitting. Up, Yume said. She got up. Had a girl? She looked up at the massive hole between her and her friend. Ruth stood at the rail above her and waved. Are you okay? She asked. Alive. Asuka, you need to move. Asuka nodded and turned around. Her tether was gone. The gravity was all messed up again. She felt like she was wading through sludge. Was she bleeding? Did we do it? She asked the captain. Keep moving. Her legs seemed to move on their own accord. Checked her suit metrics. Everything okay? She tried not to whimper as she attempted to move faster than a walk. We need to fix the spin, AM said. It's too risky with Yaz and labor. Asuka grabbed the rail. I'm good. She felt her whole body wrench over the side and belatedly remembered she wasn't tethered. Her mistake flashed across the synapses of her brain. Too late. Rule number 1. Pretty basic, and she was... Oh God, she was no longer attached. She was in space. Asuka! Someone shouted. Asuka saw the wheel recede from her. 3 meters. 10. She thought of Kat, Becky, Winnie. So many little decisions. Each a step along the path from that cold pool with her mother to this place, here. To be an object in space, separated from family, planet, ship, crew. The sum of her was all here. Though the here was increasingly nowhere near any other thing in the universe. She shut her eyes. This was alone. Fuck that, she said. Then she gritted her teeth and jammed her finger on the joystick of her propulsion pack. Her whole right arm screamed in pain with the effort of moving even the smallest bones in her finger, but the force of it pushed her back at the ship. Too fast. She turned herself so she was alongside the wheel, flying parallel. The ship flashed between her legs, and then the airlock loomed ahead, Ruth standing there on the walkway, body braced to catch her if need be. Asuka slowed until her pace was equal to the turn of the wheel. She grabbed the rail with both arms and swung herself over, slinging her legs and good arm around it as she jerked to a stop. In the aftermath, she heard whooping cheers and Ruth's voice. "I'm going to fucking kill you for scaring me like that, Asuka Hoshino Silva." And Asuka lay flat on the narrow walkway, sucking in oxygen so she could laugh in relief. Then Ruth was hauling her to her feet. They staggered the last few meters to the airlock. As they waited for the air to repressurize, Ruth hugged her tight. "We fucking did it, friend." They grinned at each other. Couldn't stop grinning. The airlock released, and it seemed like half the ship was waiting for them. "Welcome back, Asuka." Alpha's voice was only a little sulky. Asuka smiled. "I forgive you, Alpha." Lala wrestled Ruth's helmet off so she could kiss her, while AM and Yingyue helped peel Asuka out of her suit. She managed somehow not to howl when they got to her arm. "You look like hell," AM told her. "Well, I feel fantastic." "Me too," said Yingyue. Crew were clumped in a group bear hug. They called for Asuka to join them. "We really did it? We'll need to correct more with our side engines, but we're back in the zone of mission viability." "You're lucky I'm a fucking genius," AM added. "Yes, we are," Yingyue laughed. Asuka sobered a moment. "How's Yaz?" "Yaz and her baby are both well. You can see her yourself when you go to the clinic, which is where you're going right now. We'll make sure she gets there before the adrenaline wears off," said Ruth, laughing. She and Lala each threw an arm around her and steered her through the crowd. At the threshold, Asuka took a last look at her friends. Joy in the air like carbonation. She thought of all the things they had never said to the people they left behind and didn't know whether she should cry or laugh. Then she took a deep breath and let the light fill her. Let the arms of her friends carry her through the door into the next room and the next. "What if no one ever knows that we made it?" she thought. Her mother's words came back. "A parent can't write the end of a child's story. That's for the child to figure out." Because they were two now, Earth and her children, flying to that distant, unknown planet, with the hope they might build a new world full of birdsong and trees. "You will have to content ourselves with hope," Asuka thought. It would have to be enough. Chapter 72. Dear Mom, I'm sorry. For so many things. For not reading your letters until it was too late. For not talking to you about everything that mattered when we still had time. For not listening to you. For endangering you. For being a brat. For being too young to understand you. For not appreciating you when I could have. For leaving without saying goodbye. And for leaving you at all. I miss you more than I can say. I think of you all the time, and I want to talk to you now about everything. Only more so now that people are having children. I may not, and I'm all right with that. There will be plenty of children running around this tiny spaceship anyway. But we're going to make it, Mom. I wanted you to know. We aren't lost out here in the dark. Unfortunately, without the walkie, it's going to be a long time before you get this message. We're loading it in a swarm of nanobots and launching them back to you. If AM's math is right, you should get it in 15 years. I hope that's not too late to tell you I love you. We're traveling across space, like an Arctic tern in the winds of the wide open sky. Do you see me up here? I'm on a journey. Love, your little bird.